Cycle has its own system for AC, so it's good. But for CM, they have like a special system so that EC only works at CM. But for the delegation officers, they need that structure. It's probably like this all the time, but they have ACs as well.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues, and welcome back to the afternoon session. The sitting is open. I would also like to welcome our guests up there, including some special guests. You know who you are. I remind members that in order to be registered for the sitting, you should insert your badge when you take your seat and keep it inserted for at least 30 seconds. You should also insert your badge in order to speak or vote. To request the floor, please press the request button just once. I also remind members that the Assembly agreed on Monday that the speaking time in all debates today will be 3 minutes for spokespersons of political groups and 2 minutes for all other speakers. The first item of business this afternoon is a debate under the urgent procedure on women's access to justice, document 16446, presented by Ms. Aysu Bankoglu on behalf of the Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination. In order to finish by 4:25, I will interrupt the list of speakers, if I have to, at about 4:15 to allow time for the reply and the vote. I call Ms. Bankoglu, rapporteur. You have 7 minutes now and 3 minutes at the end of the reply, to reply to the debate.
Mr. President, dear colleagues, let me start by clarifying what justice means, because the word is too often hollowed out. Justice for all women and girls is not just a service to be delivered. It is a political, economic, and structural struggle. Real justice requires the dismantling of patriarchal systems, the redistribution of power, and the protection of civic space. A remedy that arrives after the harm has hardened into silence is simply not a justice. It is its absence dressed in procedure and rhetoric. So, let us be precise about what an accessible justice system actually requires. It must ensure that the justice systems respond to the needs, the interests, and the rights of all women and girls in all their diversity. It must rest on institutions that are accessible, timely, affordable, and solution-oriented, grounded in international human rights law and the rule of law. A justice delayed until a woman who can no longer afford to pursue it. A remedy priced beyond her reach. A procedure indifferent to who she is and where she stands. These are not technical shortcomings, dear colleagues. They are the places where rights go to die. And justice cannot be written behind the closed doors. Legislative processes themselves must allow for meaningful, safe, and inclusive participation of civil society organizations and the communities most affected. Laws made about women without women will fail women every time. Above all, a safe and violence-free environment is not a privilege to be granted. It is a right to be guaranteed. That requires us to adapt, to fund, and to implement laws and policies to prevent and eliminate every form of violence against women and girls. It means confronting domestic violence and rape, the gender-related killing of women, femicide, human trafficking, sexual exploitation, and the deliberate cruelty of economic violence against women and girls. Dear colleagues, naming these harms is not enough. We are called to end them. And if women do not trust the system that is supposed to protect them, if they do not report violations to their rights, if they feel re-victimized by law professionals and by the justice system itself, if they feel stigmatized and they are not believed, then the whole architecture of women's human rights means little. And impunity will continue to exist, sending the message that women and their rights are not expendable. So, dear colleagues, we gather a movement that demands both clarity and courage. The 17th session of Commission on Status of Women held in March in New York closed not with the quiet consensus of 7 decades, but for the first time in its history, with the need to hold a vote. We should name that for what it is. It is a warning, but it is also a victory. A warning because the very tradition of agreeing on women's rights could no longer be taken for granted. A victory because an overwhelming cross-regional majority of states refused to let a single voice of opposition erase what generations of women have won with their persistent efforts. So, what does this movement require from us? It requires strong cross-regional alliances, and it requires reliable, flexible financing, particularly for women's rights and human rights organizations. Rights can be rolled back far faster than they were won. Defending what we have achieved is not a nostalgia. It is the precondition for advancing and improving women's rights in real life. So, dear colleagues, we must be also honest, and we cannot repair what we refuse to see. That is why we must establish partnerships with relevant stakeholders to identify the gaps and challenges and to support research for justice systems that are not only gender sensitive and responsive, but also age sensitive. We must develop evidence-based, data-driven policy, invest in the data systems that make women's realities visible, confront disinformation, hate speech, and measure our progress toward justice. As parliamentarians, we need information to be able to act and move in the right direction. Dear colleagues, let me be clear. Rights are non-negotiable. Access to justice for all women and girls is not a bargaining chip. They are not a concession to be traded in negotiations, nor a favor to be granted and withdrawn as political windshift. Rights are established in international law, they are indivisible and oath. Rights are not to be bargained for, they are guaranteed, defended, and fulfilled. And I will end also with a clear message. We will not be pushed away from the place which we had already won. We will hold the line where it must be held, and we will press it forward where it can be moved, with resolve, not with resignation, with persistence across every parliament, every courtroom, and every community. The measure of our commitment is not the volume of our declarations, but the constancy of our work. Let us return to that work with determination, and let us not rest until justice for all women and girls is no longer a promise, but a practice, an everyday reality, and a fulfilled right. Thank you for your attendance.
Thank you, Ms. Bankoglu. I remind the Assembly that speaking time is limited to 3 minutes for spokespersons for the political groups and 2 minutes for other members. In the debate, I call first Ms. Tiblon.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me say plainly what we all know but too rarely say with the urgency it deserves. Across our continent, our girls and women do not have the access to justice they are entitled to. They are subjected to violence, overwhelmingly gender-based violence, in their homes, online, and on our streets. And when they find the courage to come forward, what happens? Too few cases are even prosecuted. Fewer still end up in conviction. The system that is supposed to protect them is far too often failing them at every stage. Let's be honest about the scale of this. Roughly 1 in 5 women in Europe will experience intimate partner violence in their lifetime. Thousands of women are killed in femicides across our continent every single year, and that is the minimum estimate because underreporting remains massive. Behind every one of those numbers is a woman who was let down by her police station, by her courtroom, by her own state. Let's look honestly at why. A woman who reports an assault today still faces a system built for somebody else's convenience. She is interviewed by officers with no training in trauma. She waits months, sometimes years, for a case to reach a courtroom, if it ever does. She is asked to relive the worst moment of her life in front of the person who caused it. And too often, the case is closed, not because nothing happened, but because the system decided it was not worth pursuing. That is not justice, that is institutional indifference, and it has a gender. This cannot continue to be treated as a secondary concern, addressed with a paragraph in a broader report and then forgotten. We need specialized units within police forces and prosecution services trained specifically to handle gender-based violence with competence and care. We need fast-track procedures so survivors are not left waiting years for a verdict while their abusers walk free. We need judges and prosecutors to be held accountable when cases are dropped without proper investigation. And we need every state in this assembly to collect and publish real data on reporting, prosecution, and conviction rates. Because what is not measured is too easily ignored. We owe our girls and women more than sympathy. We owe them justice. Thank you.
Ms. Ahedo.
It's okay? Yeah, I'm sorry. Well, I will speak in Spanish. Bien, la realidad es que ningún país ha conseguido aún un acceso real e igual de hombres y mujeres a la justicia, algo que es totalmente necesario y es un reto para absolutamente todos. Para lograrlo es necesario tener en cuenta y trabajar sobre situaciones socioeconómicas, prejuicios que existen en el sistema, la posición de diferentes grupos vulnerables como migrantes, mujeres con discapacidad, de minorías, LGTBIQ+, víctimas invisibles o aquellas de países donde la tradición impide la denuncia por vergüenza, por miedo o por el marido o la suegra. Bien, hay que dotar el ámbito jurídico de perspectiva de género y para esto hace falta, entre otras cosas, formación. Y la justicia, además, y en este caso debe ser gratuita. De otro modo, habrá mujeres con imposibilidad económica para su acceso. Y esto, unido a otras barreras que ya quedan perfectamente reflejadas en el informe, suponen cuando menos una revictimización. Si hablamos de violencia de género, creemos que es imprescindible la creación de juzgados especializados. En el Estado español ya existen, surgen de una ley orgánica. Pero además de esto, es esencial también proporcionar una atención integral a las víctimas, siendo necesaria una formación específica para todos los implicados. Necesita especial cuidado también la prevención de la infradenuncia. No podemos olvidarla, que está causada generalmente por miedo, por vergüenza o por convenciones sociales y culturales que debemos romper. Y yo, para finalizar, incidiría en tres cuestiones. Las leyes son importantes, fundamentales, pero solo sirven si se cumplen, si se implementan y si cuentan con financiación. Si no, son papel mojado. 2. Hay un gran peligro del avance del discurso negacionista de la ultraderecha, porque parece que no hay un problema de igualdad. Hoy a la mañana mismo hemos oído que lo tradicional es lo único que vale. No existe la violencia de género, es un invento. Con lo cual, en cuanto llegan o tocan medio poder, se recortan prestaciones y servicios. Y tercero, las mujeres somos objeto, pero sobre todo somos sujeto. Y siendo sujeto, está muy bien y pedimos buenos servicios y buen acceso a la justicia, pero también creemos que es igual de importante mejorar el acceso de las mujeres a la judicatura. Esto es, no a la justicia, sino a la judicatura en todos sus niveles, que es donde se deciden las cosas. Bien, termino diciendo que el acceso a la justicia en igualdad es esencial para que el 50% de la población ejerza todos sus derechos, lo que refuerza no solo la igualdad, sino sobre todo la democracia. Gracias.
Ms. Schelling.
Dear President, dear colleagues, on behalf of the Unified European Left, I am taking the floor on this report on women's access to justice, which we support and see as an opening important space for reflection on a number of key issues. I would like to use this opportunity to focus on how social media and new media shape women's access to justice and how justice itself is perceived and experienced. Within the scope of this report, it is of significant importance to eliminate judicial prejudices in courtrooms and to prevent the creation of secondary victimization. Today, in many cases, the judicial prejudices that come to dominate the courtrooms are profoundly reflected throughout the media and predominantly on social media. This is an important aspect indeed, and I will therefore work on it in detail in a separate report, and I am glad pointing this out here. Today, access to justice is not only about courts or legal procedures. It is also about the digital space where public opinion is formed. Social media affects which cases are visible, whose voices are heard, and how quickly institutions respond. It has become part of the justice environment itself. On the positive side, these platforms have helped women and children speak out about violence and discrimination when formal systems failed. They have made hidden cases visible and supported solidarity among women across different places. This visibility can push institutions to act and can strengthen public awareness. At the same time, there are serious risks. Women are often targeted by online harassment. hate speech, and coordinated attacks in sensitive cases. Social media can turn into a place of public judgment without due processes. This can lead to misinformation and pressure that affects real legal processes. It can also discourage victims and families from seeking justice because of fear of exposure or public shaming. In conclusion, digital spaces are not separate from justice. Therefore, we need rules that protect women and children from online harm, ensure platform responsibility, and still protect freedom of expression. Justice must remain fair both offline and online. Thank you.
Ms. Kostadinovska-Stojčevska.
Thank you. When preparing to speak on the topic of this debate, my first thought was to come up with the statistics, to mention some of the old resolutions that we have worked on here, to mention still after all this time and all these years, how few cases of domestic violence are solved in time. The only statistics that I'm going to share today with you is that only 2% of all domestic violence cases are being reported. For the sake of not breaking the rules, I will just show you this picture of Ivana and her daughter. Ivana and her daughter died this year on the 4th of March, 2026, with suicide. Ivana took her daughter in her arms and jumped over the 4th floor of her building because she could no longer put up with the domestic violence she was subdued to for many years. 36 people were accountable for those 9 years that Ivana did not receive the help that she asked for, even in the worst of times. Her daughter's school also knew and reported to social services, but they did nothing. Police officers did nothing. Social services did nothing. So the state failed not just Ivana, but her 6-year-old daughter, whose drawings, after being presented in the court, only showed pictures of how her mother is lying down and her father is beating up. I will just read for my remaining time several of the statements being published from some of the witnesses, and the main witness actually. That on the day of the tragedy, at 5 minutes after noon, the police already was there in their home because there was a call for help by Ivana. But when they came to her home, the policeman told them, you have to settle this at home. There was a videotape before the criminal court justice where her husband is beating up, but when the two policemen approach, because he's holding her hand, they both say that it's nothing, and the police say, could you please move away from the camera and settle this at home? Her husband starts laughing at her, and it's all visible at this video, and says, I told you that you cannot do anything. A person who had reports about narcotics use, family violence, and any kind of violence, and no one did nothing. Before ending, I will say that before she killed herself, she made a video call to her husband. And because he was with the witness at that time in front of the building, his only comment was that this B will never die. She won't do anything. In the next minutes, he heard the clap when her daughter and his wife fell down, and he didn't even have the courage to go and identify them. Thank you.
Mr. Stamatis.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, as I can see in the list of the speakers, I can see only 2 men. So I think that we, as a men, we have to be on front line in this issue, and we have to fight more to have equal justice for a woman. First of all, I would like to congratulate ISU as a rapporteur and the whole staff of Equality, No Discrimination for this support for this very sensitive issue. Dear friends, 2 years ago, one woman, one girl from Roma community, from early marriage, somewhere in Greece, they married in 14 years old, as a girl, not as a woman. And she tried, after 2 years, to escape, not only about this fake, unacceptable marriage, but to find her right to live free. Not only about the violence, but all the stereotypes about this marriage. And she finds a home, safe home, and she needs a job. After 2 years, she finds a job. But finally, the door was closed to the justice to find all the equal rights as a democratic citizen. This story happened in many countries in our member states. Not only about the Roma woman, about the elderly women, about the women with disabilities, about transgender women. All these vulnerable groups are vulnerable because in some countries they don't recognize that they have rights. The most crucial right that you have as a citizen is to have access to justice. And this report shows all this to us, to our member states, especially to our governments, and especially in all these women that are waiting for us to have a voice, not only for her, but for the other women in the other places of the planet. Thank you.
Thank you to the speakers on behalf of political groups, and now we move on to the other speakers. I call next Baroness Brown.
Thank you. The Taliban has suspended the rule of law in favour of interwoven patchworks of written and verbal decrees designed to enforce the mass oppression of women, denying access to justice. Now there's no notion of consent. Male relatives control marital arrangements, child marriage and slavery has been legalised, and domestic violence protections are non-existent. The ICC has issued arrest warrants for the Supreme Leader and the Chief Justice of the Taliban for the crime against humanity of gender persecution. And yet we still play cricket with them. Why? Globally, over 324,000 people have been deported to Afghanistan this year. 60% of them were women and girls. The EU have invited the Taliban representatives to Brussels to discuss forced returns, despite their Court of Justice determining that every Afghan woman is at risk of persecution. The claim that this doesn't legitimise the Taliban is absolutely bogus. With far-right parties across Europe calling for remigration, this feels like populist appeasement. What could we do instead that's positive? Well, we could recognise deportations to Afghanistan are unconscionable. We could also work towards the concept of gender apartheid in international law. Our own resolution 2614 calls for member states party to their own statute to consider adding the crime of gender apartheid to the statute. Surely we can do more to promote this. Let's affirm our commitment to human rights, not just for our own people, but for those who are fleeing enslavement and persecution. Let's recognise gender apartheid is a force of evil. We all know that to be true.
Next is Miss Yasko. And I don't... She's there, sorry.
Yes. In 2013, I was a master's student traveling from Ukraine to United States to one of the big leadership conferences for young people around all the globe. And what did I have in my agenda? Of course, I wanted to speak about Ukraine, about our revolution of dignity. I wanted to promote my country, and I was searching for some media at that conference where I could speak to. And then I found some media that were excited to speak to me, but then they asked me a question. Oh, but do you belong to the first generation of women who were the first educated? I said, no. They said, then we are not interested to interview you. I was so shocked because that was the moment that I've learned that around the world, many women, and actually not only women, also men, sometimes are not allowed to receive education. I come from the family where we all had education. We all were working, women, men, there were no difference. That was the moment when I realized how different justice can be. And I decided to speak about the right for education, just because this is so much connected. I used to be advocating for the rights of the women of Iran and was for some reason sure that the situation in Iran is so bad that it cannot be worse. And then someone from Afghanistan approached me and I said, but do you know that the girls in Afghanistan are not allowed actually to study? When we talk about justice, we should talk about the roots that should not go only about the justice system, but more about the universal justice and the rights to have education, health, and all kinds of freedom. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Larsen? Not present. Then we move on to Ms. Vogels.
Thank you, Chair. Dear colleagues, access to justice is the cornerstone of the rule of law. Yet let us be frank, there can be no justice while injustice remains unrecognized in law, policy and support systems. This was the clear warning of civil society, including Femme for Freedom at the United Nations in March 2026. Across Europe, women continue to face structural barriers to justice. This is particularly acute for victims of harmful practices such as forced marriage, marital captivity, polygamy, child marriage, and so-called virginity tests and surgeries. Women in informal or unregistered marriages are often rendered legally invisible, and invisibility often means impunity. In 2023, in our resolution 2481, we rightly conclude that marital captivity is a serious human rights violation, and we call on states to act through legislation, prevention, and victim protection. But much more needs to be done by all of us, as our colleague Mr. Stanatis reiterated. We must therefore ensure that justice systems are accessible, responsive, and free from bias, and that all women can seek protection safely and effectively. And I urge all Council of Europe member states to ratify and fully implement the Istanbul Convention without delay. Progress is possible. Targeted measures in some member states, including the Netherlands, suggest that practical improvements can be achieved. But also in my country is still room for improvement. Now is the time to match our principles with action. Thank you, Chair.
Ms. Baldursdottir.
Mr. President, I would like to thank the rapporteur for bringing this important issue of women's access to justice before the Assembly. In theory, justice is blind. In practice, however, it often turns its back on women. As this resolution reminds us, while 1 in 3 women have experienced violence, only 1 in 8 ever reported to the police. This gap is not an accident.
It reflects discriminatory laws, lack of legal awareness, high costs, and fear of retaliation. One of the biggest problems is that many women face barriers when seeking justice. Even when women do come forward, they are often confronted with the stereotype of the ideal victim, facing disbelief or diminished protection if their case does not fit that stereotype. As a result, their cases may not be taken as seriously by the police or the courts. We must also remember that access to justice is not only about laws on paper. It is about fair treatment, equal representation, and the ability to be heard without fear. Therefore, I call on governments, legal institutions, and civil society to take concrete action, expand legal aid for women, train justice officials on gender sensitivity, and remove discriminatory laws that still exist in many countries. Justice should not be a privilege. It should be a right that every woman can exercise equally. Only then can we truly say that justice is for all. Thank you.
Ms. Wokshi.
Thank you, dear Chairman, dear colleagues. Through this report, the Assembly rightly recognizes that women continue to face structural barriers, gender bias, and increasingly the misuse of legal proceedings aimed at silencing and discouraging them. The Assembly has already recognized these challenges by adopting several resolutions, and as it was mentioned previously by my colleagues. But we see in our countries that the situation is worsened. Many women do not get justice or access to justice. Maybe because, in my country, for example, the state institutions is not on their side, but on the side of perpetrators. So I do congratulate the reporters for these important initiatives that should be a call in our countries to react towards the recommendations of this report. But I would like to treat the violence towards women not only on domestic point of view, but violence in general toward women like us. The attempt to misuse the justice towards women in politics. And I would like to mention the case of Yulia Tymoshenko, which I had the pleasure to meet a few days ago here. She is a Ukrainian first women prime minister, and for more than 2 decades, a strong advocate on Ukraine's European futures. Why I'm mentioning that? Based on information available in public domain and concerns expressed by international observers, the criminal proceedings against her gave a growing perception in Ukraine and internationally that the case may be politically motivated. Whether it is or not, and I don't want to talk about this, to give my opinion on that, such a perception is concerning because people's confidence in justice depends not only on courts being independent, but also on their being seen as independent. The debate is not about interfering in justice proceedings. It's about defending fundamental democratic principles, the presumption of innocence, judicial independence, the right of the people of opposition to compete freely, without fear that justice may be used as a weapon of political rivalry. Thank you.
Baroness Coffey.
I thank Ms. Bankoglu for her report, and I will say at the start that access to justice for women should be a lot more straightforward than it is. And while I sympathise with a lot of what she says, I cannot support the resolution as it stands, not least because of paragraph 16, which seeks the legal recognition of the concept of gender apartheid. Now, Rian Vogel's mentioned the Istanbul Convention, and I'm pleased that the UK finally ratified this in 2022. But today I'm focusing on the grooming gang scandal in the UK. I will not read out some of the horrific descriptions of what was inflicted on young women. I was pleased when the current government asked Baroness Louise Casey to undertake an order to the previous inquiry. Now, let's be clear. White men have and do abuse white girls. But Baroness Casey recognised that a particular issue omitted was consideration of how ethnicity seemed to be a factor in the selection of people groomed in certain communities. As her report said, despite reviews, reports and inquiries raising questions about men from Asian or Pakistani backgrounds grooming and sexually exploiting young white girls, the system has consistently failed to fully acknowledge this or collect accurate data so it can be examined effectively. I also agreed with her recommendation to quash any convictions of victims who were criminalised when they should have been protected. And while the government has since introduced legislation to pardon child prostitution offences, Baroness Casey was right to call them out for not going further and pardoning them for other offences undertaken while they were being groomed in such a horrific way. Still, having a criminal record has stopped many of these now women from getting good jobs, travelling abroad, or even helping out at their children's school. We need to right this wrong.
Madame Regol? Not present. Then Ms. Yildiz.
Thank you, dear chairs, dear colleagues. Access to justice is a fundamental right, starting with the right to life. The ongoing genocide in Gaza directly targets the right to life, the ultimate priority that enables the exercise of all other rights. Under the Fourth Geneva Convention, women are entitled to special protection, yet international mechanisms have failed, leaving the global community completely paralyzed to protect the women of Gaza. As UN Women Executive Director Sima Baus exposed this harrowing reality, women in Gaza pray for peace, if not a quick death in their sleep with their children in their arms. This utter dysfunction of international law proves that justice in Gaza is inaccessible fundamentally, as there is no protection of right to life itself. When it comes to women's access to justice systems in general, we must address institutional discrimination against Muslim women in Europe, with clear examples even in some member states. Any state intervention into women's decisions over their own bodies and religious choices, under whatever pretext, is entirely unacceptable and fundamentally inhuman. Unlawful bans on the headscarf in public sectors and the abaya in schools directly violate bodily and personal autonomy. The Court of Justice of the EU decisions, Ajbita and Wabe, alongside the ECHR misuse of the margin of appreciation concept, systematically penalize Muslim women, forcing them to choose between their faith and livelihoods. These decisions directly obstruct women's access to justice and completely nullify their avenues for seeking legal redress. Whether in conflict zones or self-proclaimed democratic societies, every woman deserves equal access to justice with equality and dignity. Thank you.
Ms. Gökçe.
Thank you. I would like to thank Madam Rapporteur, dear Aysu Bankoğlu, for preparing such an important report in such a short period of time. Access to justice for women and girls remains one of the most urgent challenges facing all member states, because access to justice determines whether rights are real or merely theoretical. Because if women encounter gender bias, institutional failures, poor coordination, or ineffective investigations when seeking protection, then their rights, including the most serious cases, their right to life, right to be protected from torture and degrading treatment, or even right to be protected from slavery, are not effectively guaranteed. The rich case law of the European Court of Human Rights clearly demonstrates this. Whether in Belgium, the Republic of Moldova, Ireland, Turkey, Italy, Croatia, Greece, France, Romania, Bulgaria, or many other member states, the court has repeatedly found violations of the convention where women and girls were not adequately protected from violence, trafficking, sexual abuse, forced prostitution, or other forms of gender-based violence. These judgments show that this is not the problem of only one country or another. While the scale and severity of the problem differ across member states, it remains a shared European challenge. At the heart of these violations lies structural gender inequality and systemic discrimination against women. Putting the preservation of family ahead of the lives of women and girls makes makes this problem even more severe. This is why the Istanbul Convention remains essential. Combating violence against women requires effective prevention and protection, strong coordination between institutions, effective investigations, timely justice, and above all, an end to victim-blaming attitude by public authorities. I would like to thank the rapporteur once again for this excellent report. I wholeheartedly support it. Thank you.
Ms. Floridia.
Thank you, President. Colleagues, parlerò in italiano adesso. Innanzitutto desidero ringraziare la relatrice Aysu Bankoglu per il suo prezioso e vitale report sull'accesso delle donne alla giustizia. Sì, dico vitale perché qui parliamo della vita delle donne, del nostro diritto a vivere in sicurezza e ad accedere pienamente alla giustizia. Ma sappiamo che la realtà non è questa. Sappiamo che la violenza che le donne vivono nei più diversi contesti, nelle case, nei luoghi di lavoro, negli spazi pubblici, si è amplificata, si è diffusa ed è entrata anche sui social, colpendo ora sempre di più anche bambine, ragazze e giovani donne. E troppo spesso, quando denunciano, si scontrano con pregiudizi, ritardi e silenzi. Oggi non stiamo affrontando una questione marginale, ma una questione democratica. E in qualità di Youth Rapporteur, di relatrice giovanile della Commissione per gli Affari Sociali, voglio essere molto chiara. Su questo tema non può esserci alcuna esitazione, nessuna ambiguità, nessuna zona grigia quando si tratta di proteggere metà della nostra popolazione e nessun arretramento né politico né culturale, perché a pagare il prezzo più alto di politiche miope e retrograde sono sempre loro, bambine, ragazze, donne. Per questo servono azioni e non solo parole. Per questo chiediamo passi chiari e urgenti come quelli inseriti nel report della nostra collega. E permettetemi di fare un'ultima considerazione. Anche voi, penso, colleghe e colleghi, vi sarete accorti che siamo solo noi oggi a parlare di questo tema, a parte due colleghi. E per questo mi rivolgo ai colleghi uomini. Noi abbiamo bisogno di sentire anche la vostra voce, perché questo non è un tema delle donne, è un tema che riguarda tutti noi. E solo così potremmo salvaguardare e garantire alle nostre madri, alle nostre sorelle, alle nostre figlie e nipoti che questo, ciò che è veramente vitale, è vivere libere, vivere sicure e vivere come noi stesse vogliamo essere. Grazie.
Ms. Stevenson.
Thank you, colleagues. Violence against women is endemic and it's pervasive, but rather than making progress in this area, it feels very much like we're going backwards. 1 in 3 women in the EU still experience some form of physical or sexual violence in their lifetime. And to tackle this, we need to make serious reforms in access to justice. A significant barrier, particularly in Ireland, is the use of survivors' counselling notes as evidence. So in Ireland, there's a practice where these deeply personal, confidential records are routinely used as evidence against a survivor. They're weaponised against a survivor to discredit their account of the violence they experienced, and they're scrutinised and used in the courts by the perpetrator's defence team. It's a really appalling practice which prevents many women from seeking justice. If survivors fear that seeking counselling notes could jeopardise a future prosecution, some will simply not seek help. They will not go to the counselling. And no survivor should be asked to sacrifice their mental health and their well-being to pursue justice. Legal aid is another major barrier. In Ireland, the financial means test for receiving free legal aid precludes many survivors from domestic violence. Financial abuse, as we all know, is often used as a factor in domestic violence cases, further restricting women's ability to access that legal aid. Some women are deemed ineligible for legal aid because joint assets, of which in practice they have absolutely no control, are counted in those thresholds. Access to free legal aid is vital in cases of domestic violence involving financial abuse, as victim survivors simply do not have access to their own finances to pay for legal services. The group of experts on this from the Council of Europe came to Ireland and they noted the low prosecution and conviction rates and the lenient sentences for violence for survivors of domestic, sexual-based and gender-based violence, creating a sort of perception amongst survivors of a permissive culture that if sufficient sentencing isn't brought, and if sentencing is too lenient, then survivors feel like there is no meaningful justice being pursued. Women continue to experience endless barriers in their quest for justice, whether it's financial, whether it's physical, or indeed going through that re-traumatizing process through the justice system, and that has to change. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes the list of speakers. I call Ms. Bankoglu, rapporteur, to reply. You have 3 minutes.
Dear colleagues, thank you very much for your all interventions and all comments and your interest on this very important matter. And I would like to recall some of the hard facts, actually. Worldwide, a woman is killed by every 10 minutes, dear colleagues. In Europe, 1 woman in 3 faces partner violence. 1 in 6 experiences sexual violence. And these are just the cases, reported ones. And women and girls continue being abused and killed. That's the reality. Women's rights defenders are under attack. And we also see numerous examples of hate speech online and offline against women politicians, often including rape and death threats. I do face such examples. We see fabricated videos and intimate images of women and girls created with artificial intelligence and without the consent of the person concerned. So in all these cases, dear colleagues, women experience the limitations of justice systems to protect and enforce their rights and interests. As a parliamentarian, I also face such limitations in justice system. So let's be clear. Our justice systems were created far before women had the rights that we have today. The laws have, of course, changed in the last decades in most of our member states, but the culture and the long-held practices of judicial procedures and law enforcement take much longer to be changed. So to combat inequality between men and women, we need to combat gender stereotypes. We need to fight against normalizing a culture of sexism and gender violence. We need to stop expecting women to behave in a certain way to be treated as credible. So we need justice systems which are, of course, not biased against women. And this assembly has been always very vocal and active in promoting women's rights over the years. And today's debates illustrates our strong commitment to protect the rights of half of the population, and this includes, of course, their right to justice. That's why I call on all of you to support this resolution and to vote for women's rights, for gender equality, for the right to life free from violence, and for the justice system that takes account of needs and circumstances of women and girls in all their diversity. Let's all work to make equal and effective access to justice a reality for everyone, for everywhere, and at all times, dear colleagues. And I would like to also say thank you to all women's human rights defenders, women's civil society organizations who are fighting for their rights, and the members of this assembly who defend and fight for women's human rights and gender equality. Thank you very much.
Does the chairperson of the committee wish to speak?
Monsieur le Président, je suis ravie de représenter la Commission sur l'égalité et la non-discrimination lors de ce débat. Je salue l'initiative et le travail de notre collègue Aïchou sur cette question. L'idée d'organiser un débat d'urgence sur ce sujet s'est imposée suite à la réunion de la Commission de la condition de la femme des Nations Unies, CSW, à New York en mars dernier. Le thème prioritaire a été le besoin de garantir et renforcer l'accès à la justice pour toutes les femmes et les filles. Nous avons discuté afin d'évaluer les progrès accomplis, identifier les défis persistants et orienter l'action publique à l'échelle internationale. Les débats ont souligné la nécessité de systèmes juridiques inclusifs et équitables, l'élimination des lois et pratiques discriminatoires et la levée des obstacles structurels qui entravent l'exercice effectif des droits. J'aimerais attirer votre attention sur 2 points spécifiques du projet de résolution. D'une part, l'urgence d'analyser et traiter les causes de faibles taux de poursuites et de condamnation dans les affaires de violence à l'égard des femmes, notamment les raisons des faibles taux de signalement de ces violences et les obstacles auxquels les femmes victimes de violences doivent faire face. C'est capital d'analyser et comprendre les raisons derrière les faibles taux de signalement et de poursuite. Les femmes ont besoin de se sentir en confiance quand elles ont affaire au système de justice. Elles doivent connaître leurs droits et recevoir protection et soutien pour les faire valoir. Une autre question très importante en relation avec la précédente est le besoin d'agir dans la formation des professionnels du droit et de la justice. Cette formation doit être de bonne qualité et devenir obligatoire et continue. Les systèmes de justice ne répondront pas aux besoins des femmes jusqu'à ce que les professionnels qui y travaillent soient bien formés et connaissent les obstacles auxquels se heurtent ces femmes dans l'accès à la justice et qu'ils aient les moyens et la volonté de les surmonter. Ce projet de résolution intègre des appels à l'action concrets pour améliorer l'accès des femmes à la justice. Je vous prie de les écouter et d'agir en soutenant ce texte et en lui donnant suite dans vos pays respectifs. Les droits des femmes dans nos États membres et partout dans le monde ne peuvent plus attendre. Je vous remercie.
Thank you. The debate is closed. No amendments have been tabled. We will therefore now proceed to vote on the draft resolution contained in document 16446. A simple majority is required. The vote is open. How come it's increasing? The vote is closed. I call for the results to be displayed, and the draft resolution in document 16446 is adopted.
Ladies and gentlemen, we can continue. The next item of business this afternoon is the debate on the report titled Fighting Back Against Transnational Repression, document 16421, presented by Mr. Konstantinos Efstatiou on behalf of the Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights. In order to finish by 5:40 p.m., I will interrupt the list of speakers at about 5:05 p.m. to allow time for the reply and the vote. I call Mr. Efstatiou, Rapporteur. You have 7 minutes now and 3 minutes at the end to reply to the debate.
Madam President, dear colleagues, we often operate under the wrong assumption that once forcibly or self-exiled political dissident or journalist or a human rights defender escapes the borders of an oppressive regime, their plight ends. Unfortunately, as instances of foreign interference increase in frequency and severity, authoritarian regimes are finding new sophisticated ways to subjugate, silence, intimidate, and punish their opponents far beyond their home borders. This is not a rare or isolated phenomenon. Since 2014, Freedom House has documented 1,375 instances of physical transnational repression perpetrated by 54 origin states in 107 host states. There are cases where prolific perpetrators, including China, Russia, Turkey, and Iran, do notoriously interfere with our democracies. Their actions violate domestic law in the host country, amounting to violations of state sovereignty, undermine the rule of law, infringe upon fundamental human rights, and pose a serious threat to our collective national security. Despite the undeniably large scale of this problem, we face a critical gap in our ability to fight back. This is a total absence of a tailored legal framework, and most notably the lack of common, universally agreed definition of transnational repression. Because we do not have a unified definition, many cases remain completely unidentified, meaning the true scale of this phenomenon is likely much greater than what has been recorded. Therefore, how can we defeat a threat that we have not even defined? In my view, the Council of Europe is uniquely positioned to fill this gap. As a pan-European organization for the defense of human rights and the rule of law, the Council of Europe should not compromise on any grounds and continue promoting even more the respect of human rights. Furthermore, it should continue to lead a coordinated response to protect human rights across borders and reinforce democratic security and the rule of law in Europe and beyond. The definition I propose is clear. Transnational repression is a form of foreign interference employed by a state, its organs, or its proxies to intimidate, silence, harass, attack, or even kill individuals beyond its borders, regardless of their nationality. To understand the urgency and gravity of this issue, we must look closely at the methods being deployed right here on European soil. First is the most brutal and direct method, assassinations and physical violence used to silence critics. Authoritarian states use the power of fear to suppress dissent. We remember the poisoning of Mr. Litvinenko in London, a case where the European Court of Human Rights found the Russian Federation responsible, and the horrific murder of dissident journalist Jamal Khashoggi inside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. Recently, in February 2024, Maxim Kuzminov, a Russian pilot who defected to Ukraine, was shot dead in Spain in a targeted killing linked to Russian intelligence. In March 2024, Leonid Volkov, an aide to Alexei Navalny, was brutally attacked with a hammer in Vilnius. In London, independent Iranian journalist Pouria Zarati was stabbed outside his home in an assault characterized as an Iranian regime warning shot. In Germany, Turkish journalist Erk Akarer was attacked with knives and fists in the yard of his home, and in 2022 in Sweden, Turkish journalist Ahmet Donmez was assaulted when driving his 6-year-old daughter from school. These acts of physical violence send a chilling message to every exile. You can never be safe. We will find you. Better for you not to talk. Authoritarian regimes no longer rely solely on physical violence. They have learned to weaponize the very tools of international cooperation, even the judiciary, that we built to fight crime. Most notably, we are witnessing the systematic misuse of the Interpol notice system. As of 2022, approximately 58% of Interpol's member states were classified as partly free or not free by Freedom House. This allows autocratic regimes to exploit red and blue notices to hunt down dissidents. We saw this happening in Belarus. In case Belarusian filmmaker Andrei Huniot, who was arrested at Belgrade airport on a politically motivated Belarusian red notice for alleged tax evasion. When host states execute this abusive request without questioning their political motivation, they inadvertently become facilitators of transnational repression. Beyond Interpol, we see the dangerous weaponization of mutual legal assistance frameworks. Many states exploit these bilateral and multilateral agreements to gain access to privileged information about dissidents and political opponents, or to freeze their assets in host countries. Trials sometimes prove to be a tool of transnational repression rather than a service to justice. This is more than evident in anti-money laundering and corruption charges against the opponents. As the Royal United Services Institute recently warned in its report, exploiting mutual legal assistance and extradition mechanisms allows hostile states to sustain campaigns against dissidents, turning tools meant for justice into instruments of persecution. We must therefore confront the abuse of anti-money laundering and counter-terrorist financing measures. There are cases where authorities deliberately exploit Financial Action Task Force standards to financially exclude and incapacitate their opponents by poisoning database and feeding false reports. They trigger automated risk database like WordCheck, trapping dissidents falsely labeled as suspected terrorists. Such designations automatically add a person to banking compliance database, causing banks and other financial institutions to deny service. The no-tipping rule in these financial systems prevents the victims from discovering why they are targeted, leaving them unable to mount a proper legal defense or access. Greater transparency within Interpol is essential. Penalizing states that misuse anti-money laundering recommendations to silence opponents is also vital. Another reason we must fight back is that impunity and the ease which the perpetrators and transnational repression escape prosecution and accountability seems to have permitted even established democracies. This may result in temptation to slide towards acts of transnational repression, either by acting on their own behalf or as proxies of another state or ally, and this amounts to negating our role as guarantors of human rights. I stop here, and I would like to listen to the interventions of our colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Eftatiu. I remind the Assembly that speaking time is limited to 3 minutes for spokespersons for the political groups and 2 minutes for other members. In the debate, I call first Mr. James McCleary on behalf of ALDE. Please.
Proud to have the opportunity to respond on behalf of ALDE today. Transnational repression is one of the defining challenges facing democracies. As modern conflict moves increasingly into the grey zone, Europe's adversaries continue to act with impunity to target their critics given sanctuary across Europe. It has not gone unnoticed. Just 9 days ago, the European Parliament passed a motion calling for a zero-tolerance response to transnational repression in Europe. Authoritarian regimes increasingly refuse to stop at their own borders. They seek to intimidate, threaten, and silence critics wherever they may be. A protester in exile, a journalist living abroad, a student studying overseas, a democracy activist who believed they had found safety in another country. These people are increasingly finding the reach of authoritarian regimes extends well beyond their national frontiers. In the United Kingdom, Hong Kongers and pro-democracy Chinese activists have faced growing intimidation and harassment. Bounties have been placed on the heads of activists living in Britain. Reports have emerged of surveillance, threats, and pressure directed not only at individuals, but also at their families living overseas. Many UK-based Hong Kongers fear the proposed Chinese super embassy complex in central London could end up becoming their prison. Nor is this challenge limited to China. Russia has used assassination, poisoning, and intimidation beyond its borders. This included the high-profile case of the poisoning of former intelligence officer Sergei Skripal and his daughter in Salisbury in the UK in 2018, and just a year later, the shooting of former Chechen rebel commander Zelimkhan Kangoshvili in a Berlin park. Iran has targeted dissidents abroad. Belarus has pursued opponents in exile, even going so far as to redirect a flight so they could arrest a Russian journalist. Increasingly, they are using local criminal networks and private investigators in European countries to do their dirty work for them so that they have an added layer of deniability. Authoritarian regimes are increasingly learning from one another, and democracies must do the same. We need stronger protections for victims of transnational repression. We need effective reporting mechanisms, closer intelligence cooperation, targeted sanctions against those responsible, and stronger transparency requirements for foreign state-linked organisations operating within our countries. Most importantly, we must recognise that those incidents are not isolated events, but part of a deliberate strategy designed to export fear beyond authoritarian borders. The Council of Europe is uniquely placed to respond. We should work together to establish common standards for identifying, monitoring and combating transnational aggression. Moving away from the reactive case-by-case model so easily exploited, we should support those targeted by hostile states and ensure law enforcement agencies have the tools they need to respond. Europe must send a clear message. Our democracies are places of freedom, not hunting grounds for dictatorships. And those who seek to intimidate, threaten and silence people on European soil must be met with a united and determined response. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Castell, on behalf of UEL, please.
Chair, first of all, let me congratulate the rapporteur for this important work. Because indeed, transnational repression takes various forms depending on circumstances and time. For example, silencing dissidents abroad by threatening them, abducting them, or abusing extradition requests. Yet some governments, Turkey foremost among them, have systematically applied every sort of exploitation of international law enforcement tools, in addition to abducting dozens of people from other countries, several of which are themselves members of the Council of Europe. We are appalled by that, as the only Council of Europe member state on the list, Turkey ranks second, right after China, in the league of the Russian Federation, Tajikistan, Belarus and Iran. The abuse of Interpol Red Notice system and the stolen and lost travel documents database has been the primary tool to circumvent the requirements of international law on extradition. Many dissidents have been deprived of their right to travel freely, their passports wrongly revoked on the basis of falsified declaration of loss. Counter-terrorism and terrorism financing frameworks have likewise been turned into instruments of intimidation, branding peaceful critics abroad as financiers of terrorism, with consequences that follow them everywhere. We therefore support the measures in Resolution 2509 and Recommendations 2257, including targeted sanctions against those involved in international repression, and every legal measure against foreign diplomats and consular officials complicit in it, including declaring them persona non grata and imposing visa restrictions. With growing concern, we see these patterns spreading. In Ukraine, we observe rising challenges to human rights and the rule of law, and a judicial system under pressure, an increased political targeting of cases, and a growing appetite to persecute those who think differently or who uncover what is inconvenient for those in power. And here too, the abuse of Interpol is becoming a tool used ever more frequently. This is a deeply worrying sign because we want cases of transnational repression to decrease, not to increase. This Assembly will stand firmly for eradicating this phenomenon. And while it is almost impossible to reverse in countries like China, Iran, Turkey, or Belarus, we still hope Ukraine will not follow the same path. This is why we so warmly welcome Mr. Efstatiou's report, because it uncovers real cases. In my own work, I have taken a stand in the case of Muraktan Tokmadi, whom the rapporteur also reflects. And the cases concerning Kazakhstan are likewise becoming worrying. My sincere wish is that Kazakhstan too will not follow the path of those at the top of the league of perpetrating a state. Dear colleagues, we do not need many words nor sophisticated terms to support this report. We need only to follow up the cases and to recognize the simple existence of transnational repression for what it is, a serious threat to democracy and, above all, the fragile democracies. This Assembly must take a firm stand and take this much-used tool out of the hands of the authoritarian regimes. Thank you, Konstantinos.
Thank you. And next, I call Mr. Molina on behalf of SOC. Please.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. First and foremost, I want to congratulate our rapporteur, Konstantinos Efstatiou, for this clear-sighted and courageous report. Let me start by a quote. In 2021, I received a video call from one of my siblings in Tibet. When I picked up, I found they were calling from the local police station, surrounded by half of our family. Police officers urged me to behave well abroad and refrain from engaging in activities that could go against Chinese policies. If I failed to obey, officers said my relatives would suffer consequences. This terrible testimony, which reveals the psychological terror of transnational repression, was given by Doden, a Tibetan living in Switzerland, to The Guardian at the beginning of 2024. For the group of Socialists, Democrats and Greens, transnational repression is not a minor offence. It is an attack on the foundations of our democracies. When a regime reaches across borders to intimidate an activist on our streets, against a dissident who found refuge here, it is not only attacking that one person, it is attacking all of us. It sends a message that to every critic everywhere, that there is no safe place to tell the truth. At its core, the prevention of transnational repression is therefore a fight for freedom of expression, the right without which no democracy can breathe. If people who fled persecution cannot speak freely in Strasbourg, in Bucharest or in London, then our freedom too is worth less. Yes, much of these repressions comes from outside, from Russia, from China, from Iran. But colleagues, unfortunately, it also comes from within. Member states of this very Council of Europe, Turkey or Azerbaijan, pursue their critics across our borders. A state that signs our convention and then hunts its own people abroad betrays everything we stand for. It is unacceptable, and we must say so plainly. So what do we owe the people who trusted Europe with their safety? Let us stand up to protect their rights. Member states must build the risk of transnational repression systematically into their migration policy and their criminal justice, so that we never return a refugee to their persecutor, and those who threaten and surveil on our soil are held to account. And we must not leave those affected alone. We must support them through dedicated contact points they can trust, train our police and security services to recognize the threat instead of mistaking the victims for the problem, and strengthen international cooperation, because no country defeats a borderless threat behind its own borders. Protecting victims of transnational repression is protecting ourselves. Defending their voices is defending our democratic security. I invite you to support this report. Thank you.
Thank you. And the next speaker, I call Mr. Zingaris on behalf of EPP CD. Please.
Thank you, Madam President, and Madam Chairwoman, and dear colleagues. Konstantin Eustachios touched the bottom, the real masterminders of international or transnational repressions, and it was high time to do that after European Parliament did it in fantastic resolution addressing international repression of human rights defenders. Synchronizing with our colleagues in the European Parliament our moves, we add something more. But I would like to turn your attention to concrete cases. Our group draws the attention of our national parliaments to the terrible actions of Russian and Belarusian state security services in destabilizing the security of our member states. By careful and concentrated actions, obvious and subliminal, they seek to increase the political temperature by financing radical groups in Europe with the objective of increasing the tensions between and with our societies and increasing anti-European trends across our population. More recently, efforts have been put, if you remember, on disturbing military installation in Czech Republic, in the place of Verbice. For example, in Montreal, international aviation authorities just declared that flights Athens-Vilnius and arresting this flight underway with false accusation of bomb by Minsk regime was absolutely created by the terrorist act of Belarusian regime. In just Lithuanian courts, you have, in Polish courts, you have 22 suspected agents of Russian military intelligence service of GRU, while they were behind white European parcel bomb plots when self-inflaming materials were put to the transportation airplanes, and there now court proceedings are going on. Madam President, looking to this act of destabilization by Russian intelligence and Belarusian intelligence services, we should come to idea to declare them link international terrorist group, as was declared by us, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, as a threat to our democracy. So in this case, we should go with our legislative initiative forward. And now, in our House, Belarusian and Russian remarkable opposition groups risking their life working under our auspices against terrible Lukashenko and Putin regimes, supporting Ukrainian war of liberation. For this, in this case, we should increase our House security, we increase the working opposition group security, and think how to finance our security roof, especially when a few days ago, our computer system was attacked, under attack of this House. So thank you so much, and let's think how to be awake. And Mr. Asafius, your report is amazing, very scrupulously prepared, and thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you. And the next speaker, I call Mr. Gevorgyan on behalf of ECPA.
It works. This report is based on a fundamentally important recognition. States may misuse legitimate legal mechanisms not to pursue justice, but to target political opponents. This is the very foundation of the concept of transnational repression. In this regard, I would like to raise two additional aspects of this problem. The first concerns the misuse of international legal cooperation mechanisms for political purposes. If we acknowledge this risk, in relation to individuals located outside a state's border, we should also be prepared to discuss situations where the same international instruments are used for domestic political prosecution. The underlying issue is not the geographical location of the victim. It is the willingness of the public authorities to instrumentalize legal mechanisms for political purposes. If a state is prepared to misuse international legal cooperation against opponents abroad, we cannot ignore the possibility that the same instruments may also be used against political opponents within the country itself. In this sense, the report points to a broader challenge. Do international mechanisms serve the interest of justice, or do they become instruments of political struggle? This question calls on us to ensure that these mechanisms are not discredited by authoritarian tendencies emerging within Council of Europe member states. The second aspect concerns restrictions on the right to return to one's homeland. Particular concern arises when public figures or members of diaspora communities are effectively denied entry to their homeland because of their political views or criticism of those in power. The right to maintain connections with one's homeland should never depend on political loyalty. Otherwise, a travel ban becomes a punishment for dissent. Such measures also have a profound human dimension. They become a form of repression based on the deliberate infliction of psychological suffering and the humiliation of human dignity because of persons' beliefs and opinions. For many members of diaspora communities, the homeland is not merely a territory. It's a part of their identity, their history, and their dignity. In such circumstances, it no longer matters where those individuals are physically located. Dear colleagues, both of these phenomena share the same root cause: the use of state powers not to uphold the law, but to restrict political pluralism and punish dissent. Our response to these abuses must be, therefore, be systematic and consistent. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And this concludes the spokespersons for the political groups, and we'll continue on speakers list. In this debate, I call next Ms. Brammer. Please.
Frau Vizepräsidentin, was wir hier besprechen, ist ein sehr, sehr wichtiges Thema, und ich danke Kostas Evstathio für diesen wirklich guten und exzellent ausgearbeiteten Bericht, denn das Thema ist eines, das so ziemlich jeglichen Bereich betrifft, mit dem wir uns hier beschäftigen. Es geht nicht nur darum, dass die Rechte von Einzelnen durch Staaten gefährdet sind und dass Einzelne angegriffen werden, sondern es geht vor allem auch darum, dass unsere Systeme angegriffen werden. Durch den Missbrauch von Systemen, die dafür geschaffen sind, dass Staaten zusammenarbeiten und das auf viel Vertrauen basiert, wie zum Beispiel dem Interpol-System, dadurch wird dieses Vertrauen missbraucht, und Vertrauen in Systeme ist eine der wichtigsten Währungen in unserem Rechtsstaat. Wenn ich mich nicht mehr darauf verlassen kann, dass zum Beispiel ein Red Notice Alarm tatsächlich richtig ist, wenn ich immer hinterfragen muss, ob das nicht ein Missbrauch sein könnte, dann funktioniert das System nicht mehr. Wenn ein Gerichtsverfahren in einem Land angestrengt wird, aus missbräuchlicher Art, um Menschen, die einem Regime unbequem sind, im Ausland noch zu verfolgen, dann ist das Vertrauen in dieses Gerichtssystem zerstört und vor allem auch das Vertrauen der Personen, die in diesem System arbeiten müssen. Wenn Staatsanwältinnen und Richterinnen sich nicht mehr darauf verlassen können, dass sie valide Informationen bekommen und ihre Informationen aufgrund von validen Verfahren führen, dann ist das System zerstört. Und es ist unser System. Es sind nicht die Systeme der Staaten, die diese Repression ausüben, sondern es sind unsere Systeme. Der Bericht enthält eine Reihe von Möglichkeiten, wie wir dagegen vorgehen können, und wir sollten das alle beherzigen. Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much. And the next speaker, I call Ms. Vinda Keller, please.
Ja, sehr geehrte Frau Präsidentin, sehr geehrte Rapporteure, ich danke Ihnen vielmals für diesen Bericht, der
eindrücklich und differenziert darlegt, in welcher Notlage, Sie schreiben es zu Beginn selber, um Sie zu zitieren, sich politische Dissidenten, Journalisten, Menschenrechtsaktivisten im Exil befinden, weil die Verfolgung nicht endet. Und wenn ich mir die Bemerkung noch erlauben darf, diese Dissidenten befinden sich oft auch in einem Clinch, weil sie in den Ländern, in denen sie sich befinden, dann halt eben auch teilweise unter einem Generalverdacht befinden. Wie gesagt, die Verfolgung endet nicht. Da herrscht ständige Unsicherheit, wie lange, und ich spreche jetzt beispielsweise von Mütterchen Russland, welches in Gestalt von Wladimir Putin wieder zu sich gekommen ist, um es mit den Worten von Michail Schischkin, des großen russischen Gegenwartsautors, auszudrücken. Er ist ein kompromissloser Kritiker des russischen Autokraten. Ich stehe uneingeschränkt, sagt er, an der Seite der Ukrainerinnen und Ukrainer in ihrem Kampf gegen das Putin-Regime. Deshalb hat man mich in meiner Heimat zum ausländischen Agenten erklärt und meine Bücher verboten, obwohl ich der einzige Schriftsteller bin, der mit allen 3 wichtigen Literaturpreisen Russlands ausgezeichnet ist. Ja, Michail Schischkin machte seine Beschattung durch mutmaßliche russische Spione öffentlich. Und er meint, dass viele russische Diplomaten, die jüngst aus westeuropäischen Ländern ausgewiesen wurden, das war vor etwa 2 Jahren, in die Schweiz gekommen seien. Es wimmle von russischen Agenten. Er hätte gerade kürzlich einen vor seinem Haus entdeckt, als er versucht habe, mit ihnen Kontakt aufzunehmen, seien sie davon gebraust. Es ist eine gemeinsame Aufgabe unserer westlichen Rechtsstaaten, dieses Unwesen zu bekämpfen. Und Schischkin meint, wichtig ist, dass diejenigen, die betroffen sind, darüber reden.
Thank you very much. And the next speaker, Mr. Mantsos, please. Unfortunately, he's not here, so I continue with the next speaker, and I call Ms. Mezentseva Fedorenko, please.
Thank you, Madam Kadri, Madam President. Colleagues, I want to first thank the rapporteur and the Committee on Legal Affairs for this tremendous work. In the very end of this important legal text, maybe not very interesting to read it through for many, but actually in practice it will mean a lot for many thousands of people who are today in trouble because of the misuse of international instruments which were previously designed actually to protect human rights, dignity, and the rights for all. So we're talking about the phenomena of transnational repressions. That there can be a very wide phenomena in new international criminal law, because today we talk about something that is not very evident for many. So we talk about states using political oppressions when you are being, for instance, in denial in your home state, or you don't agree to the policies, or simple as that, we have an example of a state which has been expelled from this House, Russian Federation, from the Council of Europe in general, and it does misuse, according to statistics, the Interpol charges, the Interpol cases, and uses it as transnational repressions against many citizens, not only against Russia. I would like to also mention those volunteers from Russia who actually fight shoulder to shoulder together with Ukrainians at the battlefields and defending the whole Europe altogether. Of course, it's also the services which include banking services, visas, and many, many others. But however, today we also have to talk about national agencies which cooperate with Interpol and not overloaded with the cases, so they have to be transparent, they can't be political, and they have to be practical. Thank you, dear colleagues. I call you to support the report.
Thank you very much. And the next speaker, Mr. Rashan, please.
Thank you. Colleagues,
Targeting political exiles is not a recent development. Historically, states have frequently pursued dissidents across borders. The intent of governments to suppress opposition abroad has always existed. What makes this report necessary right now is the shift in how these operations are actually conducted. The methods have moved largely beyond physical violence. Today, foreign governments are actively misusing international and European bureaucratic systems. They are manipulating Interpol red notices to trigger unwarranted arrests, exploiting anti-money laundering regulations to cut off people's bank accounts, and using digital spyware to monitor individuals living legally within our jurisdictions. They are effectively using our own administrative tools against the people who reside here. This is exactly why the Council of Europe has to deal with this. When our legal frameworks are used by foreign states to restrict mobility or freeze assets, it stops being just a foreign policy issue. It becomes a direct challenge to our domestic rule of law. If we do not implement the coordinated responses outlined in this report, we are essentially leaving our legal systems open to foreign manipulation. Adopting these recommendations is a necessary step to close those loopholes and maintain the integrity of our institutions. Thank you.
Thank you. And the next speaker called Ms. Yildiz, please.
You always yell at me.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dear colleagues, unfortunately, I must say that there are fundamental problems with this report. First of all, the report assumes from the outset that certain governments are engaged in transnational oppression without providing a sufficiently clear definition of the term, while using one-sided sources which are being used as a tool for disinformation for a specific political agenda. While selecting the sources of the reports, our Assembly's institutional identity, credibility, and reliability should be taken into consideration. I need to remind you once again to use so-called sources of criminal and terrorist organizations tasked as an agent of influence through political agendas designed to reinforce the economic networks of a specific cult is entirely incompatible with the institutional credibility of the body. It is the collective responsibility of us all to prevent this institution from being weaponized and to safeguard our intellectual independence, institutional principles, and impartiality. Regarding the paragraphs concerning Turkey in the explanatory memorandum, I would like to underline 5 points. Using the terminology of the movement equates to becoming an instrument of the Fethullahist terrorist organization, FETÖ. What we are dealing with here is not a movement, but a terrorist organization that plotted a coup attempt and martyred 251 Turkish citizens. Defining this structure, which is entirely conflicting every single principle of our institution as a movement, is, to say the very least, a stark display of institutional ignorance. Dear colleagues, to be clear, this is ignorance. This institution ought to be ashamed of this. For that reason, I'm unable to support this report. Thank you.
Thank you. And the next speaker, I call Mr. Singhi, please.
Thank you, Madam President. Dear colleagues, first of all, I reject the report's one-sided reference to Turkey. Presumably, the rapporteur used mostly FETÖ publications or resources. Let us call things by their proper names. FETÖ is not a movement. It is a terrorist organization that attempted to overthrow Turkey's constitutional order via a military coup attempt and bombed the Turkish parliament, killed more than 250 people, and injured thousands of people who stood up to defend democracy on 15 July 2016. I believe this assembly should stand with those who gave their lives defending democracy. not with those who have the blood of innocent people on their hands. As a matter of fact, what truly surprises me is not what this report includes, but rather what it ignores. The report extensively speaks about oppression, yet remains silent on Israel. Today, people all over the world are paying a price simply for speaking out for the genocide in Gaza. Francesca Albanese, Mark Ruffalo, Enver El-Ghazi, Steve Bell are the only tip of the iceberg. Countless actors, athletes, activists, academics, students, politicians, journalists, and even ordinary citizens have been threatened, intimidated, and sanctioned. Last but not least, the global Sumud flotilla, carrying the hopes and conscience of humanity to Gaza, was seized in international waters, and the human rights activists on board were abducted, detained, abused, beaten, and humiliated by Israeli forces. Colleagues, if we are serious about combating transnational repression, our approach must be universal, principled, objective, and consistent. No state should be treated differently, and no victim should be overlooked because of political considerations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That concludes the list of speakers, and I call Mr. Efstathiou, rapporteur, to reply. You have 3 minutes, please.
I would like to thank all the participants in the interventions, the contribution to this serious case. And thank you for the incidents you have mentioned, even, of course, the incidents of transnational repression against everybody are not acceptable. It is more than obvious that and critical that we cannot allow transnational repression to ruin our democracies. I first want to make clear that it is not the Interpol system or the judiciary at stake. What is their misuse or manipulation, and even the objections of our noble colleagues from Turkey are welcomed in this for this very serious case. Dear colleagues, this report tries to provide some concrete solutions, and we desperately need to fight back. This is obvious in paragraph 11 of our draft resolution. We call on all members of several states to enact legislation that officially defines and criminalizes transnational repression, treating it as an aggravating factor in criminal prosecutions. We must establish dedicated domestic focal points, set up secure reporting hotlines, and introduce targeted sanctions against foreign officials who orchestrate these abuses. Finally, I ask you to support the proposal to call on the Committee of Ministers to draft an international legal instrument on preventing and punishing transnational repression, exactly for the reasons you have raised in your interventions. Transnational repression menaces the very roots of our democratic societies and the core of our rule of law. That's why I therefore urge you to support this resolution and recommendation so that the Council of Europe can lead the way in securing safer, more just rules-based order. Finally, I want to say something regarding myself. I stand before you today for the last time. I'm very fortunate to be able to conclude a decade of my working for the Assembly with a report whose topic lies very close to my heart, fighting back against transnational repression, targeting freedom. But not only that. I have tried all these years to contribute to our main mission and goal, the protection of human rights through democracy and the rule of law, that in a way that embraces even the last human being on earth. There is one Englishman, Sir David Hunt, whom I highly respect. He reminds us that it would be wrong to regard the rule of law, democracy, and human rights as mere lifeless principles. Politicians and jurists all agree that our convention is a living instrument and thus becomes meaningful only if it touches and protects human beings in their daily lives. In the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1789, there is a phrase which reveals the true meaning of our mission. I quote, "L'ignorance, l'oubli ou le mépris des droits de l'homme sont les seules causes du malheur public et de la corruption du gouvernement." So we don't have the right either to ignore people's human rights, nor to forget our mission, nor to allow any discount of human rights content. Otherwise, chaos and demerit, the motherhood of corruption, will prevail. This is the reason we need strong democratic institutions of justice, rule of law, and freedom that we must all abide by. For as Hobbes, the most unconventional theorist, has written, the state of nature is no better than a war of all against all, in which man is a wolf to man. Unless there is a firm organization of justice, there can be no art, no letters, no society, in which it's worst of all, continual fear and danger of violent death, and the life of man solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. That's why we have to fight transnational repression and any form of repression worldwide. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, Konstantinos Efstathiou has presented his last report today before the Assembly. Konstantinos has been such a figure in the work of the Assembly, being a member of the Parliamentary Assembly for a decade, since 2016. He has been an exceptional, active and committed member in the work of the Assembly, having fulfilled great many roles with particular commitment to the field of human rights, cultural cooperation, the rule of law and the work of the European Court of Human Rights. He was chairperson of the Committee of Rules, Ethics and Immunities, chairperson of the Subcommittee of the Implementation of Judgment of the European Court of Human Rights, chairperson of the Subcommittee on Culture, Diversity and Heritage, and above all, rapporteur on many significant reports of the Assembly, in particular on the implementation of judgments of the European Court of Human Rights, allegations of systemic torture and inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment in places of detention in Europe, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on education and culture, the role of education in a digital era, restricting and streamlining of the rules of procedure of the Assembly, journalism in the context of Israel-Gaza conflict. In all his work, Konstantinos has not only been a champion for the values of the Council of Europe, but also a close friend of many people here. Kostis, you really will be missed here. Thank you very much for all your work and for the commitment that you have shown. Thank you. Does the chairperson of the committee, Mr. Erik Niels Kroes, wish to speak? You may have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, dear Chair. Please don't forget that we still need to vote for Kostis' resolution and report. Before I say a few words on behalf of the committee, as the committee chair, I have 2 points from more a personal note. First, I know quite well what the so-called transnational repression means. I have been targeted by a Russian-triggered Interpol Red Notice since 2010 for an absurd charge of piracy. So I'm very happy that a pirate is chairing the legal committee in this institution. And this method, this term, the transnational repression, was probably not invented back in 2010 yet. But the method itself, as was said before, is much older. It goes back to Stalin, it goes back to the Russian Tsars, other dictators. And I am not sure, I'm happy to go with the report and with the term now, if it actually is the correct one, because we are really talking about murder, we are talking about terrorism, we are talking about extrajudicial killings, we are talking about making people disappear. That is, transnational repression sounds very mellow. It's a little bit like this hybrid war. Hybrid war is also real war, and transnational repression is actually international crime. That's what we are talking about. Anyway, nonetheless, I would, of course, with all of you, congratulate Kostis for the excellent work. It was a hard report. He did several trips to Interpol headquarters, to the US Department of State, to several US-based NGOs. He talked to several victims of international crime or transnational repression. And I'm very happy that Council of Europe is taking this topic seriously. We started in 2023. There was a report by Sir Christopher Chope, and this is a continuation of this. The committee and I personally support the proposals, which have been also endorsed mostly unanimously by the committee. I draw attention to the draft recommendation calling on the Committee of Ministers to prepare a new international legal instrument, potentially a convention. And this is important because this is not just to prevent, but also to punish transnational repression, and this is what we should pursue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Erik Niels-Gross. And if I may give a word just for a short while, Mr. Hispan, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is not a blue card, neither a challenge of the report. This is a hack. Because Kostas is one of the giants of this organization, a giant that tirelessly have worked by the people and for the people and with the people, especially the more weak and the more vulnerable. Thanks to him, I have learned a lot about this institution, how to do politics, but especially how to be a good person, because his humanity and his permanent smile. As he always says, before ideology is friendship, and you have always been a great friend. I miss you a lot. Thank you, Kostas.
Thank you. And debate is now closed. The Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights has presented a draft resolution document 16421, to which 20 amendments and 2 sub-amendments have been tabled. The Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights has also presented a draft recommendation document 16421, to which 1 amendment has been tabled. We will start by taking the amendments to the draft resolution. We will be taken in the order in which they appear in the compendium. I remind you that speeches on amendments are limited to 30 seconds. I understand that the chairperson of the Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights wishes to propose to the Assembly that amendments 3, 9, 5, 11, 7, 6, 13, 19 and 20 to the draft resolution document 16421, which were unanimously approved by the committee, be declared as definitely approved. Is that so, Mr. Cross? If no one objects, I will consider amendments to be approved. Is there an objection?
No objection.
Amendments 3, 9, 5, 11, 7, 6, 13, 19, 20 to the draft resolution are therefore approved and will not be called. I understand the chairperson of the Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights wishes to propose to the Assembly that amendments 1, 14, 8, 10, 4, 12, 15, 2 and 16 to the draft resolution document 16421, which were rejected by the committee with a 2/3 majority, be declared as definitively rejected. I understand that amendments 17 and 21 were also rejected by the committee with a 2/3 majority. However, because amendments 17 and 21 are subject to sub-amendments, they will still be taken separately. Is that so, Mr. Truss? If no one objects, I will consider the amendments to be rejected. Is there an objection? Amendments 1, 14, 8, 10, 4, 12, 15, 2 and 16 to the draft resolution are therefore rejected and will not be called. There is a sub-amendment proposed to Amendment 17. I first call Mr. Emanuelis Zingeris to support Amendment 17. You have 30 seconds, please.
Amendment?
Thank you. And thank you for very scrupulous work of the committee for all amendments. So in the draft resolution at the end of paragraph 1118, insert the following words: and establish mechanism ensuring granted access to basic banking services for persons denied access to financial services as a result of transnational repressions, enable them to receive income, make payments, and meet their daily needs. That is about those guys who are against the regimes, and the regime sends the papers to the banks to freeze their economic activities inside of democratic countries. Thank you.
Thank you. I call Mr. Efstathiou, rapporteur, to support the sub-amendment.
Yeah, the draft amendment is self-explanatory, improve the quality of the text and making the amendments already mentioned more concrete.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak against the sub-amendment? What is Mr. Zingeris' opinion on the sub-amendment?
Favor. I am absolutely in favor. Thank you.
Thank you. The committee is obviously in favor of the sub-amendment. I shall now put the sub-amendment to vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. The sub-amendment is agreed, adopted. Now we come to the main amendment 17, as amended. Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment as amended? What is the opinion of the committee?
Unanimously.
I shall now put the amendment as amended to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. Amendment 17 as amended is agreed. There is a sub-amendment proposed to Amendment 21. I first call Ms. Olena Homenko to support Amendment 21. You have 30 seconds.
Dear President, as a co-author of the amendment, I will support it. Dear colleagues, we had an agreement to do sub-amendment, but I proposed the original text. It's with regards to not ease the measures of the Interpol. We are referring to, again, Russian Federation as one of the world's largest perpetrators. We had cases when Ukrainian citizens, volunteers, representatives of armed forces, business people were arrested in third countries on the request of Russian Federation. They were released, some were not, so this is a misuse which we don't want to see elsewhere. This is a very good amendment, and I highly ask to support it.
Thank you. I call Mr. Konstantinos Efthastiu, Rapporteur, to support the sub-amendment. 30 seconds, please.
The same reasoning as the previous one. I mean, it's self-explanatory. Improve the quality of amendments already tabled by making them more concrete on that issue.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak against the sub-amendment? I call someone? No? What is Ms. Homenko's opinion to the sub-amendment?
Yes, Maria Mezentseva again here. We highly salute the strengthening of the text, and I think that Mr. Konstantinos did something that other chairmen of the other rapporteurs never did. He didn't weaken, he didn't reject, he strengthened our amendment. Colleagues, please support sub-amendment and then amendment as sub-amended. And we hope that the Interpol Executive Committee will never be misused, but only be strengthened. Thank you.
Thank you. The committee is obviously in favor of the sub-amendment. I shall now put the sub-amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. Agreed. The sub-amendment is agreed. Now we come to the main amendment 21 as amended. Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment as amended? What is the opinion of the committee? I shall now put the amendment as amended to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. Amendment 21 as amended is agreed. We will now proceed to vote on the draft resolution contained in document 16421 as amended. I remind you that a simple majority is required. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. The draft resolution in document 16421 as amended is adopted. We will now take the amendment to the draft recommendation. I remind you that speeches on amendments are limited to 30 seconds. I understand that the chairperson of the Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights wishes to propose to the Assembly that Amendment 18 to the draft recommendation, document 16421, which was unanimously approved by the committee, be declared as definitively approved. Is that so, Mr. Cross?
Correct.
If no one objects, I will consider the amendments to be approved. Is there an objection? Amendment 18 to the draft recommendation is therefore approved and will not be called. We will now proceed to vote on the draft recommendation contained in document 16421 as amended. I remind you that a two-thirds majority is required. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. The draft recommendation in document 16421 as amended is adopted.
Leave it.
Kostis, before you leave, allow me also some words, and I will combine these words with words to Laura at the same time. So, dear Kostis, dear Laura, today we say goodbye to two very valued members. You will stay here until the end of the week, but it's on the occasion of your two last reports. I think I need the chance to say something. Because I would like, on behalf of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, to express my sincere gratitude for your commitment, your work, and your contribution to our common mission. Your final reports are a fitting symbol for your time here. Parliamentary work is not only about debates in this chamber, but about this dedication, dialogue, and the determination to make difference through democratic institutions. You have both brought your experience, your expertise, and your very, very personal passion and commitment to this assembly. You have contributed to our debates, strengthened our common efforts, and helped uphold the values that unite us: democracy, rule of law, and human rights. Pace is built by people who serve it. Mandates may come to an end, but the impact of committed members remain in the work we continue and in the colleagues you all leave behind here. I would like to congratulate you both wholeheartedly, dear Kostis, dear Laura, for your committed service, for your sincere collegiality, and your highly valuable contribution to this assembly. I wish you both every success in the future, and I hope that you will always consider this hemicycle as your home. Thank you very much. I'm leaving again.
Dear colleagues, then we resume our meeting with the next item and the last item this afternoon, which is the debate on the report titled Violent Pornography, a Test for Human Rights, presented by Ms. Laura Castell on behalf of the Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination. And we will then hear from Mr. Joseph O'Reilly, who will present an opinion on behalf of the Committee on Social Affairs, Health and Sustainable Development. And I will now call Ms. Castell, and you have 7 minutes now and 3 minutes at the end of the reply to the debate. You have the floor, Ms. Castell. Laura.
Thank you, Chair. Working? Yeah. Dear colleagues, in no other place or no other platforms are women more dehumanized or objectified than in violent pornography. That is why the objective of this report is not to debate on pornography, but to investigate the direct impact of extreme and degrading content on the dignity and safety of women and girls. We are witnessing that digital content is increasingly pervasive, aggressive, and violent. The spreading of contents depicting sexual violence to an indiscriminate community of users that includes minors is massive and must be prevented. There is an alarming rise in content depicting physical and psychological violence, sexual assault, and dangerous practices like strangulation, leading to severe neurological consequences. This violence is not gender neutral. 97% of violent scenes target women and girls, and their suffering is a source of sexual excitement. Extensive multidisciplinary research identifies the correlation between violent pornography and violations of women's rights and shows that violent pornography leads to decreased empathy towards the pain of others, adolescent vulnerability, and normalization of rape culture and distorted notion of consent, and teaches viewers that women enjoy being coerced, abused, or raped. Colleagues, freedom of expression is a fundamental right, however, it's not absolute, and clarifying whether violent pornography infringes such limits is crucial, especially when it affects minors. That's why we asked the Venice Commission to prepare a study on this matter, and it confirms that states can legally limit violent pornography to protect public health and the rights of others, and that freedom of expression narrows when it involves dehumanization. Nevertheless, we should avoid subjective or moralistic criteria, and we should focus instead on objective harm and structural discrimination against women. Also, it stresses that a gender-sensitive and harm-based approach should be integrated into legislation and judicial practice, and emphasizes the importance of the protection of minors through risk assessment, mitigation measures, rapid removal, blocking procedures for harmful content, proportional obligations imposed to online platforms and internet providers, procedural safeguards, judicial review, and effective remedies regarding blocking or takedown orders. The Venice Commission concludes that international cooperation should be reinforced in order to align standards and facilitate cross-border evidence sharing and enforcement against the online dissemination of violent content. Colleagues, in the light of all the experts' considerations, we call on different measures: legal regulation, cooperation with online platforms, education, information and awareness-raising measures, crime prevention in the production of pornographic content, And finally, international cooperation on criminal matters. In this regard, we propose concrete measures, such as the prohibition of the production and dissemination of material depicting rape, coercion, or degradation, including non-consensual deepfakes, or the implementation of robust age verification systems and the removal of illegal content within 24 or even 48 hours, or the use of AI detection tools and hash databases to identify and block violent or non-consensual material. But at the same time, AI has great potential as a tool to detect such content and limit its spreading because it can process vast amounts of data in real time and identify tone of post and patterns. Also, we call for comprehensive and mandatory sexuality education to help youth analyze critically and reject objectification. Support the victims of the pornography industry or image abuse and offer immediate access to legal and psychological assistance. Regarding the recommendations to the Committee of Ministers, since violent pornography is transnational, we call them to lead international action and launch a worldwide campaign. As well, we call to organize an international conference on the effects and impacts of this violent content on health. In a nutshell, this resolution concludes that violent pornography is a relevant human rights issue, affecting Article 3 of the European Convention of Human Rights, which prohibits torture, inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment. It normalizes degradation, violence and sexual assault, and we, as legislators and policymakers, should address this, including the protection of minors from exposure and the harmful effects on individuals and society as a whole. I hope all these proposals have your support as well as a fruitful discussion. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you, Ms. Castell, and I now call on Mr. O'Reilly for the opinion from the Committee on Social Affairs, Health and Sustainable Development. You have 3 minutes, Joseph.
Thank you, President. Can I begin by acknowledging Ms. Laura Castell's exhaustive and detailed work to produce a quality report which has the support of the Social Affairs Committee. I had very constructive exchanges with Ms. Castell throughout the process, and I also want to acknowledge the great work of my colleague from the Secretariat of the Social Affairs Committee, Ms. Janet DeVoe. Our committee proposed a number of amendments to achieve the best possible wordings. For our second amendment sought to insert the term child sexual abuse material, rendering it unambiguously illegal. Our third amendment emphasises the harmful effect of any form of pornography on children and the need to protect them from an exposure to it. Our fourth amendment emphasises the Lanzarote Convention principle that children cannot consent to pornography. Our fifth amendment calls on the Committee of Ministers to act on the Assembly's call to draft an age-appropriate, comprehensive sex education programme. Our sixth amendment seeks to reinforce the report's call on all members and observer states to put in place legislation to criminalise sexual abuse material. Our subsequent amendments require platforms to have up-to-date detection tools, insert the term women and children, need for public education campaigns, the promotion of the Day of Protection of Children on the 18th of November, this year. And age verification critically for performers, in inverted commas, to ensure that performers, in inverted commas, to ensure that they are over 18. A research in this whole sphere has established that most children are exposed intentionally or unintentionally to pornographic material. Number two, that tragically pornography has become a key source of information and education about sexuality for many children. Number three, that boys are more likely to view it. Number four, that many adults view it frequently. The exposure of children to pornography is associated with many harms, such as violent and harmful sexual behaviour and an inability to form mutually respectful, good relationships. Its most extreme results involve rape and gratuitous violence. Again, I strongly support this major and comprehensive support, congratulate Ms Castells and urge this plenary to enthusiastically endorse it. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we'll go to the speakers list, and I remind the Assembly that the speaking time is limited to 3 minutes for spokespersons for the political groups and 2 minutes for other members. And in the debate, I call first from the UEL, Ms. Alessandra Maiorino. You have the floor.
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. President. On behalf of the UL Group, I'd like to thank the rapporteur for bringing before this Assembly an issue that has remained too long in a political blind spot. For years, we have discussed violence against women, gender stereotypes, and rape culture. Yet, we have often been reluctant to look at one of the largest global industries which is built upon the commodification of women's body and the eroticization of domination. Research cited by the rapporteur indicates that 90% of young people are exposed to pornography, some up to 5,000 hours before they reach the age of 20. Algorithms used by major platforms are designed to maximize engagement, and in doing so, they often recommend increasingly violent content. The issue here is not pornography as such. It is the normalization of violence. The report refers to a large body of research linking violent pornography to increased acceptance of violence against women, sexist attitudes, sexual coercion, and sexual assault. It cites review of 500 bodies concluding that pornography contributes to gender-based violence. Grevio has repeatedly warned that the normalization of practices such as strangulation, degradation, and non-consensual acts undermines young people's understanding of healthy relationships and genuine consent. But I would like to raise another question that deserves greater political attention. Too often the debate focuses only on consumers, while ignoring the conditions under which violent pornography is produced. What does consent really mean when economic vulnerability is the condition for participation? Can we generally speak of free choice in an industry where visibility, income, and survival might depend on producing increasingly extreme, degrading, or violent content? These are not moral questions. These are questions about power, inequality, and exploitation. For the UL Group, there are priorities. First of all, sexual education and digital literacy are indispensable. If algorithms are educating our children before schools and families do so, then democratic institutions have already lost ground. Second, online platforms must be finally held accountable. Third, our response must remain firmly rooted on women's rights, children's rights, and human dignity. Freedom of expression is a cornerstone of democracy, but it cannot exempt a multi-billion euro industry from scrutiny when there is a growing evidence of its role in normalizing violence and inequality. The real question before us is not whether violent pornography influences society, it is why society continues to treat one of the most powerful cultural industries as though it had no influence at all. Thank you.
Thank you, and I now call from the Socialists, Democrats and Greens group, Ms. Luz Martinez Seco. You have the floor.
Gracias, presidente. Señorías, comienzo en primer lugar por felicitar a Laura Castel por el esfuerzo en lograr un texto tan medido en un contexto tan complicado. Nos enfrentamos a un desafío que interpela directamente a los derechos humanos, a la igualdad y a la protección de nuestra juventud, la proliferación de la pornografía violenta en el entorno digital. No estamos hablando de un contenido neutro, sino de una realidad que banaliza la violencia, erosiona el principio de consentimiento y deshumaniza, especialmente a mujeres y a niñas. La evidencia es clara. Este tipo de contenidos representa agresiones, coerción y prácticas degradantes que acaban configurando un imaginario en el que la violencia se presenta como normal e incluso deseable. Y esto tiene consecuencias graves en la sociedad, pero especialmente en la gente joven. Los adolescentes son particularmente vulnerables. Su cerebro aún está en desarrollo y es más susceptible a la exposición repetida a estímulos intensos, lo que puede alterar la percepción de la sexualidad, dificultar la empatía y normalizar la agresión. Además, los estudios citados en el informe muestran que los jóvenes expuestos a pornografía violenta tienden a interiorizar mensajes profundamente dañinos, que la violencia forma parte del sexo, que el consentimiento no es imprescindible o que las mujeres pueden desear prácticas coercitivas. Y esto tiene un impacto directo en sus relaciones. En las chicas puede traducirse en una menor exigencia de respeto y en la aceptación de conductas violentas. En los chicos se asocia con un aumento de actitudes agresivas o coercitivas. En definitiva, estamos ante un factor que contribuye a perpetuar la violencia de género desde edades muy tempranas. Por eso nuestra respuesta no puede ser parcial. Este informe propone un enfoque integral. En primer lugar, como ya se ha dicho, un marco normativo claro que prohíba la pornografía violenta y garantice la retirada rápida de contenidos ilícitos o no consentidos. En segundo lugar, una mayor responsabilidad con las plataformas digitales, con sistemas de verificación de edad, transparencia y uso de tecnologías para impedir la difusión de estos contenidos. Pero hay un tercer pilar que es fundamental, la educación afectivo-sexual. No podemos dejar que Internet sea la principal fuente de aprendizaje de nuestros jóvenes en materia de sexualidad. La educación debe ser obligatoria, basada en la evidencia y centrada en el respeto, en la igualdad, en la autonomía corporal y el consentimiento. Debe dotar a los jóvenes de pensamiento crítico para identificar y rechazar mensajes que normalizan la violencia. Señorías, proteger a la juventud no es limitar derechos, es garantizarlos. La libertad de expresión no puede servir de escudo para contenidos que promuevan la violencia y vulneran la dignidad humana. Actuar es una obligación democrática, es construir la cultura de consentimiento, del respeto y de la igualdad real. Por eso debemos apoyar con determinación este enfoque que regula efectivamente, que responsabiliza a lo digital y con una educación afectivo-sexual robusta que prepare a nuestros jóvenes para relaciones libres de violencia. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, and I now call on Mr. Ronan Mullen from EPP.
Very much, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I want to congratulate Ms. Castell on this report. A lot of hard work has gone into it, and the EPP supports the report, as do I. Is it the perfect report? No. No report is perfect. It is better to see this report as, I think, a step on a journey to dealing with the cancer of pornography in our society. Because it is pornography in general that is the problem. It's better to think of violent and extreme pornography as a cause as a result, not a cause. Because what the research, of course, shows is that when people are exposed to pornography, particularly the young, they are gradually exposed to more and more extreme forms, and indeed find themselves in need of accessing more and more extreme forms of pornography. And that is why people such as Reem Absalom, the UN Special Rapporteur, are very clear that in the end there is a problem with pornography per se. That is not, however, to subtract from the very important goal that the rapporteur has identified, that by targeting violent and extreme pornography, we can deal with a very particular problem that is there, and it needs a response that includes ultimately recourse to the civil and criminal law, in a way that, of course, wouldn't attract support just now, regrettably, in relation to pornography in general. But sooner or later, we are going to have to grasp the nettle that freedom of expression does not extend to commodifying other people, especially not women and children, but indeed no other human being. And we have a wrong idea of freedom of expression when we see recourse to forms of pornography as somehow a legitimate expression of that. Pornography is not cost-free. It never is. There is no ethical porn. Pornography is on the rise, and it's a catastrophe. There is a link between it and with the violent behaviours that need to be further investigated. It also has a damaging impact on the mental health of youth, and I want to thank the rapporteur for accepting some of my amendments, touching, for example, on the harms that pornography does in terms of young people's mental health. Also the need to target payment networks, because that is a key part of targeting the pornography industry. It violates human dignity in every situation. We must never forget either that children's access to pornography per se is already a form of sexual abuse. And anything that ever colludes in children being able to access pornography is in itself a form of sexual abuse. We need to come to that point in our collective thinking if we're going to put people's rights and dignity front and centre. Finally, I would say the rights of parents are very important here. The only way you can build trust and get the kind of comprehensive education that the rapporteur calls for and that this report calls for is ultimately to respect the primary role of parents as educators. Nothing else will work, and they have moral values that are mostly in almost every situation sound. And I think sooner or later we will have to accept as well that parents are partners, not opponents, in the inculcation of the kind of values in young men and women that will lead to a gentle and more respectful society. But overall, I want to congratulate the rapporteur on all her hard work.
Thank you. And I now call on Mr. Pavel Jablonski from the ECPA Group.
Thank you, President. And I can only subscribe to what Mr. Mullen has said. Congratulations to the rapporteur. Very, very good work. And I, as a Conservative, I'm happy that there are some rare occasions when I can even support reports drafted by a member of the far left, which is a very good situation, because the main goal of what we are working on here is too important not to do so. We might have some differences. I will tell about it a little bit later. But it addresses indeed one of the most important challenges, how our children will perceive sexuality, how they will treat each other, their future wives and husbands. Will they be able to form functioning marriages and families? And indeed, for this reason, this is a question of our existence, of our survival. There are some things that I don't precisely like. For example, that it's written in the recommendation that it is women that the violent pornography is a threat to women. It is obviously true, but let us not lose out of sight that it's also a huge threat for men, especially for young boys, whose minds are being affected, are reshaped by these violent images, changing ways, how they perceive women, how they perceive their future wives, harming badly their ability to form functioning families. Some differences aside, I will still be supporting this as the goal is too important. And let us be precise about what it targets, because it's not about freedom of expression. It's not that we are targeting some forms of art, some political messages. It's directly violence. And there is no human right to gain profits from images of rape, of strangulation. There is no right as such. And even the Convention permits us to impose some limitation. The most important thing, and perhaps, and this was very, very accurately described in the report, is that what the porn industry is doing to our children is not just a mistake, that some children are mistakenly looking at these images. This is a plan. This is a way of making money. This industry is luring kids into watching these materials. They are falsely labeling it with the names of children cartoons so that they have future customers. And something must be done about this. I believe that this is a very good step, although this fight will be a very, very tough, very difficult. But let's face it, this is a culture war. This is a war that we should all be fighting in the interest of our children, in the interest of our survival, of our existence. If this is the war that we would refuse to fight, we would be defeated by these multinational corporations that are only counting their money, but they don't care about how our children will be affected. So let's vote for that altogether, aside our day-to-day political differences, because indeed the goal is too important. Thank you once again. Congratulations for the report.
Thank you. And I now call on Madame Benedetta Coma from ALDE.
Monsieur le Président, chers collègues, au nom du groupe ALDE, je tiens tout d'abord à remercier chaleureusement Madame Laura Castel pour la qualité de son rapport et le travail approfondi qu'elle a consacré à un sujet aussi bien sensible qu'essentiel. Ce rapport nous rappelle une réalité que nous ne pouvons plus ignorer. La pornographie violente n'est pas seulement une question de moralité ou de choix individuel. C'est une question de droits humains, d'égalité entre femmes et hommes, de protection des mineurs et du respect de la dignité humaine. Au cours des années, les contenus pornographiques sont devenus plus accessibles, plus répandus et dans de nombreux cas plus violents. La violence représentée dans ces contenus vise majoritairement les femmes et les filles. Elle banalise des comportements qui, dans la réalité, constituent des violences sexuelles ou des atteintes graves à l'intégrité des personnes. Elle véhicule l'idée dangereuse que la domination, l'humiliation ou la contrainte pourraient faire partie d'une sexualité normale, fragilisant ainsi la culture du consentement que nous nous efforçons de promouvoir. Le rapport attire également notre attention sur l'impact préoccupant de ces contenus sur les enfants et sur les adolescents. Aujourd'hui, Internet et les réseaux sociaux sont souvent la première source d'information sur la sexualité pour les jeunes. Or, la pornographie ne peut en aucun cas constituer un modèle éducatif. Elle déforme la perception des relations affectives, perturbe la compréhension du consentement et influence durablement les comportements. Les recherches citées dans le rapport mettent également en évidence des conséquences psychologiques et neurologiques importantes, notamment chez les plus jeunes, dont le cerveau est encore en développement. Face à ces défis, le groupe ALDE soutient pleinement les principales recommandations du rapport. Renforcer la protection des mineurs grâce à des systèmes efficaces de vérification de l'âge. Accélérer le retrait des contenus illégaux. Soutenir les victimes. Responsabiliser davantage les plateformes numériques et renforcer la coopération internationale. Notre réponse doit être coordonnée à l'échelle européenne et internationale. Mais surtout, nous partageons pleinement l'idée qu'une éducation complète à la sexualité, adaptée à l'âge des jeunes et fondée sur le respect, l'égalité et le consentement constitue l'un des outils les plus efficaces pour prévenir ces violences. Toute sexualité doit être fondée sur le consentement. La liberté d'expression est l'un des fondements de nos démocraties, mais aucune liberté ne peut servir de prétexte à la banalisation de la violence ou à la négation de la dignité humaine. Je vous remercie pour votre attention.
Thank you very much. And now we open the list for the members who wish to speak. And the first is Ms. Bankulögü.
Thank you, Mr. President, dear colleagues. First, I would like to thank to the dear Laura for this timely and important report. And it was really nice to meet you here and being partners for the women's rights, for the fighters for the women's rights. I'm really pleased to meet you here. And dear colleagues, gender-based violence is a scourge that has many causes, and the main one being patriarchy and the imbalance of power between women and men in the economy, in society, and within the family. Such violence continues to find new ways, of course, of perpetuating and spreading itself. One of these is violent pornography, where violence against women is not only normalized, but often presented as desirable and even glamorized. I would like to focus on one particular aspect of this report and resolution, which I consider especially important, which is prevention. More specifically, prevention through information and education. As many experts regularly point out, generation after generation of children in Europe have pornography as almost their main source of information about sex and sexuality. It is a source of misinformation. It is misleading and becoming increasingly so. So teenagers and even preteens are exposed to the wrong, dangerous, and distorted idea that violence is a standard part of any sexual encounter. Boys and girls feel almost expected to respectively perpetrate this kind of violence and accept it. They receive this harmful information, and too often they have no place to talk about it. Age-appropriate, evidence-based, comprehensive sexuality education in schools is where this conversation should happen. So I think this awareness will empower them to reject such harmful notions and ensure their personal relationships are always defined by consent and mutual respect. So it's time to make comprehensive sexual education a reality for all school students, as already recommended on many occasions by the Parliamentary Assembly. Thank you.
Thank you. And the next speaker is Mr. Kuka.
Dear Chair, dear colleagues, freedom is a human right, including the right to a self-determined, respectful sexuality, one that builds, not destroys. Yet millions of children are being robbed of that freedom. A smartphone, one click, that's all it takes to enter a world of violent pornography, not only on porn sites, but only on social media, messaging apps, even video games. The fact is alarming. 90% of online pornographic content contains violence against women. Half of all boys aged 12 to 13 visits porn sites every month. Nearly 1 in 2 young people say that imitate what they see. Pornography has become the sex education of entire generation. The consequences are real. Children develop a distorted view of sexuality. Consent becomes submission. Some develop addictions. Others carry trauma for life. Women are dehumanized. Sexual violence is normalized. Images shapes attitudes. Attitudes shape action. We must act, and we can act. Resolution 1835 showed us the way. The legal frameworks exist. Age verification is technically possible. In Switzerland, distributing pornography to minors is already a criminal offense. What is missing is political will. That's why I introduced the motion Ban Porn for Kids in the Swiss Parliament with full success. Children deserve freedom, not addiction. Respect, not exploitations. A sexuality grounded in dignity, consent and mutual respect. Let's stop protecting the profits of $1 billion industry. Let's start protecting our children. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. And the next speaker is Mr. Risch.
Geschätzte Kolleginnen, ich möchte bitte in deutscher Sprache sprechen. Vielen Dank an die Berichterstatterin. Ich möchte einige Aspekte des Berichts herausheben. Es wird ein struktureller Dialog und eine Zusammenarbeit mit Online-Plattformen gefordert. Selbstredend ist Dialog wichtig, immer. Aber wenn es um Opferschutz, insbesondere von Mädchen und Frauen geht, ist Dialog ohne maximalen gesetzgeberischen Druck im Hintergrund wirkungslos. Ein Beispiel: Die Plattform OnlyFans wird von Kritikern zu Recht als Plattform für digitale Zuhälterei und Prostitution eingeordnet. Es werden Online-Kurse angeboten und Netzwerke gebildet, die Männer zu OnlyFans-Managern ausbildet. Ein Schwerpunkt liegt dabei auf der emotionalen Abhängigkeitmachung der Frauen mit Kursen, die zeigen, wie man eine Seele einsperrt und Frauen sexuell ausbeutet. Ein Drecksgeschäft, das bekämpft gehört, national, international, mit den schärfsten Waffen der Gesetzgeber. Die heute fast schon frei zugängliche Gewaltpornografie ist das Produkt sich über Jahre verschiebender Grenzen, gesellschaftlicher Abstumpfung und Gewöhnung. Wir kennen die Metapher des Froschs, der sich in einem langsam aufheizenden Umfeld befindet, sich gewöhnt und schließlich unbemerkt stirbt. Und hier stirbt gerade in Echtzeit liebevolle Sexualitätsentwicklung, Erotik und gesunde Sexualität. Junge Mädchen und Buben wissen nicht mehr, was Sexualität im Sinne der Humana Naturalis eigentlich ist. Die sexuellen Erwartungen werden heute von einer maximal aggressiven Pornoindustrie gemacht. Ein perverses Expectation Management, das offenbar bereits eine Rückwirkung in die Popkultur zu haben scheint. Der Song Würg mich, Choke me hat es jüngst aufs Podest des ESC geschafft. Schauen wir noch etwas genauer hin. Aus infektiologischer und präventionsmedizinischer Sicht erschließt sich nicht, weshalb die Darstellung von männlichen Geschlechtsteilen ohne Kondome beim Geschlechtsverkehr und die Sichtbarkeit von Körpersäften vor und hinter Bezahlschranken nicht schon lange verboten und indexiert ist. Hier fängt es an, wenn im Bericht von lebensbedrohlichen Handlungen gesprochen wird. Ich danke.
Thank you. And the next speaker is Ms. Novicka. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. While freedom of expression is a fundamental human right recognized by democratic societies, it is not absolute. Exercising freedom of expression does not give right to hurt, humiliate, and exploit. Violent pornography is raising significant concerns about the impact of the societies, especially on children, adolescents, and it is a real form of violence. Recently, pornography has drastically evolved. It can be easily accessed by children and young people on their mobile phones. Extremely worrying is the phenomenon of using children's images for pornographic purposes, what is a drastic form of violence, and it is a crime. Violent pornography has a detrimental effect on women's and girls' self-esteem and dignity. It is necessary to stop violent pornography and prevent negative impact on children, adolescents, women, and girls. The Polish government has recently adopted the draft law on protection of children against pornographic content on the web. I am sure that Polish Parliament will vote in favor. Other measures include also comprehensive sexuality education at schools. We have to remember that children who do not have access to quality sexuality education are at greater risk of exposure to pornography in social media. I also strongly support the recommendations of the report to provide in national legislation a clear definition of violent pornography, which includes content depicting rape, humiliation, life-threatening acts, and all other forms of sexual violence. It is also very important to introduce effective sanctions against online platforms and internet service providers who allow the dissemination of illegal and violent pornographic materials and persistently fail to comply with obligations of removal of pornography from the platforms. And the last word, I would like to thank and congratulate Laura Castel for her report. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And the next speaker is Mr. Stamatis. You have the floor.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, after the smuggling for the migrants, refugees, after the human trafficking, the new theme that we have is the violent pornography. And I would like to congratulate Laura, not only about her commitment and path for this report, because this report is one step, two steps, maybe three steps forward from today for tomorrow. We have not only to protect the women, we have to protect our society. Behind of the violent pornography, there are men and dirty minds and huge of money. So we have to destroy this industry. What kind of platforms we have today? We know everybody about the dark internet and the website. So we have to protect our children, our girls, our women, and the humanity. And this report shows not only the commitment of the rapporteur, but the steps that each country can make and to protect the women on this. I have to say one thing to these women. Trust yourselves, not others. And we have to empower all these women, all these victims for violent pornography. And finally, I would like to say something in Spain. Laura, in Spanish, sorry. Quiero agradecer tu trabajo, tu cooperación y tu buen hacer en esta asamblea. Te deseo mucha suerte. Gracias.
Thank you very much. And the next speaker is Baroness Brown. You have the floor.
Thank you. The online world has grown, pornography has proliferated, and this report accurately describes violent pornography featuring women strangled, slapped, spat on, or worse. It's being normalised. These vile male power fantasies objectify women as submissive, constantly available, existing solely for the gratification of men. Exposure can alter what young men and women believe is acceptable in their own relationships, creating a culture of sexual violence and dangerous practices such as strangulation. There is a zero safe way to strangle someone. Even a small amount of pressure on the neck can harm the brain with devastating consequences. Yet many porn sites actively push this extreme consent, this extreme content, and they host outright illegal videos including child sexual abuse and rape. This year, the UK has made progress tackling pornography that depicts dangerous or illegal acts. We have criminalised the depictions of strangulation, incest and adults pretending to be under 16. Porn sites are required actively to detect and block such content with enforcement and fines for non-compliance. Yet there's so much more to do to ensure parity between offline and online pornography. What's illegal on the high street should be illegal online too. As this report rightly says, we must challenge harmful practices and expectations through comprehensive sex education, reaffirming consent as a prerequisite for every single sexual interaction. Let's affirm extreme pornography promotes coercion and violence, it promotes misogyny. We've got to recognise this threat to women and girls and work to restrict the poisonous content that the porn barons are able to peddle.
Thank you very much. And the next speaker is Ms. Baldursdottir. You have the floor.
Mr. President, I would like to begin by thanking the rapporteur, Laura Castell, for this extensive report. The rapporteur has examined the issue in depth and spoken to experts, victims, and lawyers from around the world. The fundamental question is whether violent pornography is part of free speech or whether it constitutes systemic violence against women and children that we have a duty to stop. Research shows that around 90% of young people have seen pornography. Today, access to such material is easy through smartphones and social media. Many young people are exposed to pornography for the first time between the ages of 11 and 13, often by accident. As a psychologist myself, I am well aware of the consequences that repeated exposure to pornography can have on young children and people. Pornography can give young people an unrealistic image of sex and relationships. Research also suggests that excessive exposure may affect how young people understand consent, relationships, and appropriate behavior. The report reminds us that violent pornography is not gender neutral. In the vast majority of cases, women and girls are the targets of the violence depicted. It is therefore crucial to intervene early through prevention and to strengthen sex education so that young people understand boundaries, consent, and what constitutes a healthy and respectful relationship. The law must be clear, and online platforms and social media companies must take greater responsibility for identifying and removing illegal content. Protecting children and women from violence is a public health issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And the next speaker is Ms. Stevenson. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, and I really want to congratulate Laura and Joe for their work on this really excellent, important report. There are serious concerns about the increasing proliferation of violent and extreme pornographic content on online forums, and in particular how this normalises gender-based violence and dehumanises women and girls. There's a mass growing availability of this kind of content. It's really worrying when set within the context of rising sexual violence rates in Europe. In Ireland, 1 in 4 women have experienced some form of sexual violence as an adult with their partner. This is why the existence of violence and extreme pornography, which glamorises and encourages violence during sex, including depictions of sexual assault, coercion and non-consensual conduct, is so alarming. Of particular concern is how the dangerous practice of strangulation, often referred to as non-fatal strangulation, is becoming increasingly normalised and common among young people's sexual habits. A UK-based study found that nearly half of sexually active young people had experienced strangulation, and that more than half of those under 35 had. More than half of 35-year-olds had experienced strangulation during sex. Depictions of choking are now rife on mainstream porn sites, and experts have attributed the rise of this practice among young people to their increased exposure to this online content. A 2023 report found that the average age a child first accesses this content is 13 years old. Can you imagine the brain of a 13-year-old child seeing this really extreme content? It's incredibly alarming. So I fully endorse this report's specific call for comprehensive sex education for young people to counter the harmful material they are being exposed to online. And a key component of this education needs to be greater media literacy, as the report suggests, to help young people identify and reject violent pornography in all of its forms. This is so fundamental when we talk about gender-based violence, when we talk about the escalating figures of gender-based violence, despite the commitments that we have under the Istanbul Convention. Prevention is fundamental. We can do all of the protection stuff. We can have all of the great access to justice opportunities, which we still don't. But until we tackle the prevention piece, we are going to be on this uphill battle. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And now it's Ms. Hammer. Agnes, you have the floor.
President, liebe Kollegen und Kolleginnen, ich danke für diesen Bericht, weil er sehr differenziert. Und das ist wichtig bei diesem Thema, denn Pornografie an sich ist nicht schlecht, sondern das Problem ist die gewalttätige Pornografie. Gewaltpornografie ist ein großes Problem, und zwar deshalb, weil sie nicht nur für Menschen zugänglich ist, die damit umgehen können, die erwachsene, selbstbestimmte Entscheidungen treffen, sondern sie ist für alle zugänglich und insbesondere für Jugendliche. Und wenn wir uns zurückerinnern, wie wir im Alter, wo wir uns dafür interessiert haben, versucht haben, an Pornografie zu kommen, musste man heimlich irgendwelche riesengroßen VHS-Videokassetten in irgendwelche großen Videorekorder schieben und musste darauf aufpassen, dass man nicht von irgendwelchen Eltern oder anderen Erziehungsberechtigten dabei erwischt wird. Jetzt geht man mit dem Handy, deckt sich die Decke über den Kopf oder setzt sich ins Schulklo und alles ist zugänglich. Und die schlimmsten gewaltpornografischen Videos sind zugänglich einfach nicht im Darknet und nicht über irgendwelche versteckten Kanäle. Alles, was ich dafür machen muss, ist, dass ich auf den Knopf drücke, wo steht, ich bin über 18. Dann bin ich drinnen. Und dann eröffnet sich eine Welt von Gewalt und eine Welt von Rollenbildern und von Darstellungen, die einfach ein jugendliches Gehirn nicht verarbeiten kann und auch nicht verarbeiten können soll. Und deshalb ist es wichtig, dass wir hier regulieren. Wir können uns nicht darauf verlassen, dass Plattformen selber regulieren. Denn Plattformen wollen, es ist schon gefallen, Plattformen wollen Geld verdienen. Was unsere Aufgabe ist, dass wir hier Regulierungen schaffen. Wir verbieten auch zu schnell fahren, weil es gefährlich ist. Wir verbieten auch Drogen, weil sie gefährlich sind. Und deshalb ist es auch zulässig, trotz der Meinungsfreiheit Gewaltpornografie zu verbieten. Einfach, weil sie gefährlich ist. Vielen Dank.
Thank you. And the next speaker is Madame Pilar Carra. You have
Merci,
the floor.
Monsieur le Président, chers et chers collègues. La numérisation provoque une accélération folle de la consommation de pornographie. Facilitée par le smartphone, elle n'a jamais été aussi accessible, gratuite et violente. Cette violence n'est pas neutre. Elle vise massivement les femmes et les filles et les enfants. En les soumettant, en les transformant en objets, la pornographie violente déshumanise et banalise la violence de genre. Elle prépare le terrain à leur augmentation dans la vie réelle. Quel est l'impact sur nos jeunes qui découvrent la sexualité à travers ces images de domination? En tant que parlementaire, mais aussi en tant que mère de 3 garçons adolescents, cette question me préoccupe. Un jeune garçon qui tombe sur ces scènes va ressentir une excitation pensée par les algorithmes et croire que le monde adulte cautionne cette violence. Curieux, souvent inexpérimenté, en quête de modèles, le jeune homme va revenir sur ce site de pornographie violente en pensant que la sexualité, c'est ce qu'il voit, avec des répercussions qui peuvent être désastreuses sur l'image générale qu'il a des filles, sur sa future manière de les appréhender et sur son rapport à la violence. D'où l'importance d'instaurer un dialogue en milieu scolaire, de renforcer une éducation sexuelle adaptée à l'âge et qui rappelle que le consentement et l'accord mutuel sont indispensables avant tout acte sexuel dans le respect de l'autre. Chers collègues, je vous invite à soutenir ce rapport et sa résolution. Il est urgent de presser nos États de prendre des mesures pour restreindre l'accès à la pornographie violente. Je termine avec cette citation du docteur Garcia, tirée de l'excellent rapport de notre collègue Laura Castel, qui indiquait « Pourquoi est-il nécessaire d'intégrer la violence infligée aux femmes et aux filles dans les vidéos à caractère sexuel? Pourquoi les garçons et les filles devraient-ils développer une vision de la sexualité fondée sur l'agressivité? Et pourquoi les adultes devraient-ils être convaincus qu'il s'agit d'une composante acceptable, agréable et presque nécessaire du sexe? Je vous remercie de votre attention.
Thank you very much. And the last speaker will be Mr. Verducci. Francesco, you have the floor.
Grazie Presidente. Cara Laura, c'è scritto nella tua relazione la pornografia violenta non è neutrale. E questo è il punto. Il punto sono i segni che lascia, i contraccolpi, gli elementi tossici, non solo per gli adolescenti, per tutta la nostra società. È un consumo che il più delle volte non è libero, ma è indotto e imposto dal mercato feroce, delle piattaforme, degli algoritmi, per cui dobbiamo esigere regole assolutamente, laddove violenza, umiliazione, coercizione vengono rappresentate come se fossero forme ordinarie di sessualità, questo produce un effetto distorsivo, profondo, che annienta proprio quella cultura del consenso, del rispetto, che deve essere la base di ogni relazione umana. Per questo io voglio dire, il contrasto alla pornografia non lo possiamo intendere in senso reazionario o oscurantista, guai se qualcuno lo utilizzasse come grimaldello per fermare l'educazione sessuale e affettiva nelle scuole. È proprio l'educazione alle relazioni, ai sentimenti, a una sessualità inclusiva, il modo più forte che abbiamo di contrastare modelli di pornografia violenta, di saper distinguere sempre che cos'è consenso e che cos'è invece sopraffazione. È un tema molto serio, culturale, sociale, di substrato, di sostanza anche delle relazioni quotidiane. È un tema talmente serio che determina ciò che siamo e anche l'idea di società che vogliamo, perché, e noi lo sappiamo assolutamente, una democrazia paritaria e un mondo più giusto si costruiscono solo a partire da relazioni affettive paritarie e giuste. Grazie Laura per questo lavoro e per quello che continuerai a fare. Grazie.
Thank you very much. That concludes the list of speakers, and I now call on Ms. Castell. You have 3 minutes to reply.
Well, first of all, thank you. Thank you for the broadest support, for all your comments. Thanks also for the valuable discussions that we have done in the committee during all these 2 years and all these very good discussions. Thanks also to the priceless cooperation with the Venice Commission. And also thank you to the visit of in the United Kingdom, because the United Kingdom legislation and policies was and has been a source of inspiration. Dear colleagues, during these 2 years drafting this report, we understood several facts that we all agreed on. Violent pornography constitutes a significant human rights problem. The violence depicted primarily affects women and girls. And there is a growing concern among international organizations about its potential effects on gender equality, public health, sexual violence, and child development. And finally, violent pornography should not be considered solely a matter of freedom of expression or entertainment, but also a challenge to human rights. Because violent pornography is not a harmless fiction. It is a systemic threat to gender equality, child protection, and public health. We must act, therefore, through a coordinated response to protect human rights for all. I would like to conclude by thanking the Secretary of the Equality Committee, Giorgio Lodo, and the Secretary General of my political group, Anna Kolotova, for the unconditional help and support in the preparation of this report. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And does the chairperson want to speak? And it's okay to be moved.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Avant tout, je vais dire combien j'ai aimé travailler aussi avec toi pendant ces années. Voilà. Nous assistons en matière de pornographie à une escalade avec des pratiques toujours plus violentes pour répondre à une demande et capter l'attention. Or, la pornographie, si elle est l'expression d'une sexualité libre, elle ne doit pas être une industrie de déshumanisation. Dans de nombreuses vidéos, on ne parle plus seulement de sexualité filmée. On observe des scènes de violence, d'humiliation, le plus souvent assimilables à des actes de torture. Cela pose une question centrale, celle du consentement. Peut-on réellement parler de consentement libre et éclairé lorsqu'il existe des pressions économiques, psychologiques ou des manipulations ? En droit, le consentement vicié n'est pas un consentement. Il faut ici distinguer deux réalités. D'un côté, la pornographie comme fiction scénarisée. De l'autre, la pornocriminalité, désignant des situations ou des vidéos qui servent de support à de véritables violences. Viol, porn revenge, maltraitance ou humiliation. Ce ne sont pas mes propos, mais ceux de femmes anciennes actrices ou victimes de cette industrie qui témoignent. Ce n'est plus du cinéma, c'est du réel. Au vu de son évolution, la pornographie, surtout sans éducation en parallèle, contribue aux violences faites aux femmes. Eros doit-il coexister avec Thanatos? Je ne crois pas. Sylvie Pierre Brossolette a raison lorsqu'elle affirme que ces plateformes seraient la fabrique de futurs violeurs. Mais les psychologues mettent en garde, estimant que ces contenus permettent l'érotisation et la fantasmatisation de la domination, de l'humiliation et de la violence sexuelle. Ils banalisent la brutalité, l'inceste, voire la pédocriminalité. Par ailleurs, l'accès massif des mineurs à ces plateformes, malgré les débats européens sur la vérification d'âge, pose problème. Les dispositifs actuels, facilement contournables via des VPN ou le piratage des comptes, restent insuffisants.
Certains témoignages évoquent même le vol de vidéos sur des plateformes censurées afin de les republier illégalement sur d'autres sites dans le but de contourner les mécanismes de contrôle mis en place. Ce sujet n'est donc pas une question morale, c'est une question de société et désormais une question de politique pénale. La Commission remercie Madame la rapporteure pour son travail qui souligne que si la liberté d'expression demeure un principe fondamental lorsqu'elle repose sur des contenus consensuels, non violents et respectueux de la dignité, sa restriction devient légitime, proportionnée et nécessaire dès lors que les contenus violents, coercitifs ou dégradants sont violents, coercitifs ou dégradants afin de garantir la sécurité et la dignité. Encore merci Laura pour ce rapport et merci d'avoir tellement travaillé en commission. Thank you.
The Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination has presented a draft resolution to which 25 amendments and 3 sub-amendments have been tabled. The committee has also presented a draft recommendation to which 5 amendments have been tabled, and we will start by taking the amendments to the draft resolution. They will be taken in the order which they appear in the compendium, and I remind you speeches on amendments are limited to 30 seconds. I understand that the chairperson of the committee wishes to propose to the Assembly that amendments 1, 2, 17, 3, 4, 5, 26, 22, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11, and 12, which were unanimously approved by the committee, be declared as definitively approved. Is that so? That is so. So if no one objects, I will consider the amendments to be approved. Is there any objection? There's no objection. So amendments 1, 2, 17, 3, 4, 5, 26, 22, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 to the draft resolution are therefore approved and will not be called. I understand that the chairperson of the committee also wishes to propose to the Assembly that amendments 16, 18, 19, 23, 24, 25, and 27 to the draft resolution, which were rejected by the committee with a 2/3 majority, be declared as definitively rejected. I understand that amendments 15 and 21 were also rejected by the committee with a 2/3 majority. However, because amendments 15 and 21 are subject to sub-amendments, they will be taken separately. I understand that Amendment 26 was also rejected by the committee with a 2/3 majority. However, because Amendment 26 is subject to an oral amendment, it will be taken separately. Is that so, Ms. Fresco-Olfo? It is so. Thank you. So if no one objects, I will consider the amendments to be rejected. Yes.
Herr Vizepräsident, geschätzte Kolleginnen und Kollegen, mit dieser Änderung 16, machen Sie eigentlich den ganzen Bericht kaputt. Es geht um wirklich Porno, sprich Gewaltpornografie.
Sorry, sir. We just need to see if there's 10 members that object to the amendment. There has to be 10 members objecting. You cannot have a speech now. Okay, thank you. There are no objections, so I call that amendment 16, 18, 19, 23, 24, 25, and 27 to the draft resolutions are therefore rejected and will not be called. Thank you. Then there is a sub-amendment proposed to Amendment 15, and I first call Mr. Ronan Mullen to support Amendment 15. You have 30 seconds. Mr. Mullen.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I want to thank the rapporteur again for proposing this sub-amendment. I think this just sets the context that against the background of violent pornography, there is often a hidden violence and a lack of freedom, a coercion, situations of economic and social disadvantage. Even where pornography is not ostensibly violent or extreme, that, as the sub-amendment proposes, it may benefit from situations where participants are actually very much disadvantaged and oppressed. Thank you.
Thank you, and I call on Ms. Laura Castell to support the sub-amendment.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, my proposal is to substitute the word almost, because he proposes almost invariably proceed and benefit by may proceed and benefit. So change almost by the word may.
Does anyone want to speak against the sub-amendment? That's not the case. What is the opinion of Mr. Mullen?
Sorry. I would obviously have preferred it not to have been changed at all, but I'm happy with the compromise and accept the sub-amendment.
Okay, and the committee is obviously in favor of the sub-amendment, so I will now put it to the vote. The vote is open.
So the next page will be 62.
62. Can we close? Yes, and I close the vote, call for the result. And the amendment is adopted. Thank you.
Yes.
And now we come to the main amendment 15. And does anyone want to speak against the amendment 15? It's not the case. What is the opinion of the committee? And the committee is in favor. I now put the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. And the vote is closed. I call for the result, and the amendment is adopted. And now we turn on to sub-amendments proposed to Amendment 21. I call Mr. Ronan Mullen to support Amendment 21, and you have 30 seconds, Mr. Mullen.
Thank you very much. This has to do with research, if I recall correctly, and this has to do with requiring online platforms hosting pornographic and sexually explicit content to prevent private individuals. I think that from uploading such content, so I think that's changed to uploading violent content. And again, I'm happy to accept that compromise. The important point is that private individuals would not be enabled to upload content where these websites and platforms are operating, because this is a very unaccountable behaviour, and that exposes much greater levels of risk of very harmful content.
Thank you. I'll ask Ms. Laura Castell to support sub-amendment 1.
My proposal is, instead of after paragraph 16.2, put in paragraph 16.2.2, which is one part of the proposal, and then substitute the word such, in uploading such content. Instead of this, propose the word in uploading violent content. This is the proposal of the sub-amendment.
So she has spoken about both her sub-amendments.
Yeah. Thank you. And with this, I think, as I heard it, you have talked now about both sub-amendments. But I also heard, Mr. Mullen, that you supported the sub-amendment 1. Is that true? Yes, you are nodding. So, and the committee is obviously in favor, and I now put sub-amendment 1 to the vote. The vote is open. And the vote is closed. I call for the result, and the sub-amendment is adopted. I now call on Ms. No, you have actually also spoken about sub-amendment 2, Ms. Castell. So does anyone want to speak against this sub-amendment? And what is here the opinion of Mr. Mullen? You are in favor. Thank you. And the committee is obviously in favor, and I'll now put the sub-amendment number 2 to the vote. The vote is open. And the vote is closed. I call for the result, and the sub-amendment is adopted. And now we go to the main amendment 21 as amended. Does anyone want to speak against this amendment? That's not the case. What is the opinion of the committee? The committee is in favor, so I now put this to the vote. The vote is open. And the vote is closed. I call for the results, and the amendment as amended is adopted.
Page 74.
And then we move on to amendment 26, and here I understand, Mr. Mullen, that you wishes to withdraw amendment 26 in favor of a compromise amendment. Is that so? That is so. And then I have received this oral amendment from Ms. Laura Castell, who is the rapporteur, which reads as follows. In paragraph 16.3.7, replace the words violent pornography with the words violent and non-violent pornography. And in my opinion, this oral amendment meets the criteria. Is there any opposition to the amendment being debated? That's not the case, so therefore I call Ms. Castell to support the oral amendment. You have 30 seconds.
It's because it's about research, and research about the effects of the social and psychological effects. So it is okay support research on these effects on the normal, I would say, pornography. So not delete violent, the word violent, instead try to research violent pornography and pornography research effects. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Does anyone want to speak against this oral amendment? That's not the case, and the committee is obviously in favor, and I now put the oral amendment to the vote. The vote is open.
So the next page after this will be 80.
Okay. And the vote is closed. I call for the result, and the amendment is adopted. We'll now proceed to vote on the draft resolution, and here a simple majority is required. The vote is open. And the vote is closed. I call for the result, and the resolution as amended is adopted. And now we move to the We'll move to the draft recommendation and take the 5 amendments which have been put forward. And I remind you again that speeches are on 30 seconds. I understand that the chairperson of the Committee of Equality and Non-Discrimination wishes to propose to the Assembly that amendments 28, 29 and 30 to the draft recommendation, which were rejected by the committee with a 2/3 majority, be declared definitively rejected. Is that so, Ms. Fresco-Rolfo? It is so. And if no one objects, I will consider the amendments to be approved. Is there any objection?
Sorry, to be rejected.
To be rejected, of course. Is there any objection to them being objected? That's not the case. So amendments 28, 29 and 30 to the draft recommendation are therefore approved and rejected and will not be called.
Page 84.
And we will then move to amendment number 13. And I call Mr. Joseph O'Reilly, Rapporteur for Opinion, to support amendment 13. And you have 30 seconds, Mr. O'Reilly. You move this amendment. Does anybody want to speak against? What is the opinion of the committee? You were in favor with the large majority. I'll now put it to the vote. The vote is opened. Amendment number 13. And the vote is closed. I call for the result. And the amendment is adopted.
So page 87.
And I go to amendment number 14. I call again Mr. O'Reilly to support this amendment 14.
Thank you. Just to say, I want to underline the crucial role and responsibility of technology companies in ensuring that children are effectively protected, in particular through safety for design devices and tools. So in other words, that there are sufficient protections technologically.
Thank you. Does anybody want to speak against? That's not the case. What is the opinion of the committee?
En faveur à une très large majorité.
The committee is in favor with a large majority. I now put the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. And the vote is closed. I call for the result, and the amendment is agreed to. Then we come to the draft recommendation contained in document 16.422 as amended, and I remind you that a 2/3 majority is required. The vote is open. And the vote is closed. I call for the result. And the recommendation is adopted. Thank you very much. And congratulations. And the Assembly will hold its next public sitting tomorrow morning at 10:15 with the agenda approved on Monday morning. The sitting is adjourned. Have a good evening, everyone. Sleep tight.